Chapter 256. Yi Guchen's gaze slowly shifted towards Gu Tuo. Gu Tuo's aura was heavy as he slowly stood up from the spectator stand. At this moment, all the spectators, elders, deacons, Ji Ling, Li Lingxiao, Ting Jingshan, Chu Qingqi, and even the ashen-faced Qin Lin were staring intently at the battle. Because compared to the outer court ranking battle, the following battle was the most interesting battle. Gu Tuo stepped onto the arena and looked at Yi Guchen. His tone was emotionless as he said, "Yi Guchen, I'll give you another chance. Become my disciple and you can avoid this battle so that you won't lose too much face." The surrounding disciples secretly nodded when they heard Gu Tuo's words. They believed that Gu Tuo was giving Yi Guchen a way out. After all, there was practically no suspense in this battle. They were only interested to see how many moves Yi Guchen could take from Gu Tuo. However, Elder Qin He and Chu Qingqi secretly frowned when they heard this. Gu Tuo's words seemed to be giving Yi Guchen a way out, but in reality, if Yi Guchen really did so, then the reputation that he had painstakingly built up in the Sword Sect Tower Forest would probably plummet. Moreover, it would be extremely disgraceful if news of him avoiding the battle spread. But then again, this battle wasn't fair to begin with. Therefore, Elder Qin He and Chu Qingqi hoped that Yi Guchen would take the opportunity to save face. "Yi Guchen, what will you choose?" Ji Ling's beautiful eyes stared at Yi Guchen with interest. Yi Guchen pondered. The surrounding disciples all lowered their voices and whispered. Most of them believed that Yi Guchen might be feeling regretful. Senior brother Yi Guchen? Mu Xingzu, who stood beside Yi Guchen, also looked at Yi Guchen with worry. Although she was extremely confident in Yi Guchen, her current opponent was an elder after all. Peh. Yi Guchen suddenly laughed and shook his head. This soft chuckle caused the surrounding whispers to instantly stop as everyone stared at Yi Guchen. "Yi Guchen, you should know that there is no suspense in the outcome of this battle. This old man is giving you a chance to redeem yourself. You better be tactful." Gu Tuo waved his sleeve and snorted coldly. Actually, as an elder, even though he had promised not to use his cultivation, his status was still different. Even if he beat Yi Guchen, there was no glory for him. Therefore, it would be best if they could make Yi Guchen retreat without a fight. This Yi is laughing. What confidence does Elder Gu Tuo have to make this Yi withdraw without a fight? Yi Guchen shook his head and said. As soon as he said this, the originally quiet square became so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard. Even Ji Ling and the other elite disciples of the inner courtyard were stunned. They did not expect that Yi Guchen would not retreat in the slightest. Instead, he would go tit for tat and not back down. Does this Yi Guchen know who his opponent is? Ji Ling's beautiful eyes revealed a look of astonishment. Even though she was ranked 4th in the inner courtyard, she still had to be respectful when she saw an elder. She did not dare to overstep her authority in the slightest. "Yi Guchen, you are simply hopeless. Since you don't know what's good for you, then this old man will not show mercy." Gu Tuo's face was completely gloomy. With a flip of his withered hand, a sword appeared in his hand. Although Gu Tuo did not emit the slightest bit of an expert's aura, just the aura of holding the sword made all the disciples suffocate. Their chests felt stuffy, and they felt unable to breathe. Is this the strength of an elder? Even if he doesn't use the slightest bit of true qi, I feel like I'm being oppressed by the sword? Many of the surrounding disciples were shocked and retreated continuously, as if they did not dare to get too close to the arena. The oppressive feeling of a Sword Dao Grandmaster was too strong. Looks like Sword Master Ye's situation is not good. He's kicked an iron plate. After all, he's an elder. Not everyone is qualified to challenge him. Many people were discussing animatedly. It was only when Gu Tuo truly emitted the aura of a Sword Dao Grandmaster that they realized the terror of an elder. Under the complicated gazes of all kinds, Yi Guchen faced Gu Tuo's sword and slowly stepped onto the arena. Head held high for 1,000 years, Yi Guchen's tone was cold and lonely. With one step, the arena shook. Proud and arrogant wind, he took another step. His black hair fluttered without wind, covering his cold eyes. Able to exchange swords with an opponent, Yi Guchen held the meteor-soft sword in his hand. His eyes were as sharp as a sword as he looked directly at Gutuo. It's cold at the top. Boom. As the last sentence fell, Yiguchin's feet also stepped onto the arena at the same time. The entire arena trembled with a rumble. At this moment, all the disciples held their breaths. All the laughter, ridicule, and sarcasm disappeared. At this moment, in their eyes, Yiguchin, who held a sword in his hand, seemed to be infinitely taller. He was like Mount Tai, making people look up to him. As for Gutuo, his eyes were also filled with surprise. Yiguchin also did not emit a trace of true qi, but the aura of a Sword Dao Grandmaster that he vaguely emitted was not weaker than Gutuo's. In fact, it was even stronger. This kid. Gutuo was surprised, and there was a trace of seriousness in his eyes. However, he only felt that Yiguchin was a little different. Gutuo still had absolute confidence in the outcome. Elder Gutuo, from the beginning to the end, Yiguchin of the sword sect, only have one thing to say: Yiguchin's eyes were as sharp as a sword. His aura shook the heavens, and his domineering aura was unparalleled. My sword Dao is indisputable. Accompanied by Yiguchin's cold shout, he directly drew his sword. The sword danced gracefully, laughing proudly in the sky. With one sword, the wind and clouds shook. Gutuo's face suddenly changed. Although Yiguchin's sword did not contain a trace of true qi, it was like a sword that pierced through the sky. The sharp edge shocked Gutuo from the bottom of his heart. He attacked at the same time, and the edges of his sword vibrated. With a clang, the sound of metal vibrating exploded in the sky, shaking the entire square. Boom! The spectating disciples' faces were filled with shock. They were not shocked by the fluctuations of the battle, but by the fact that Yiguchin was actually able to contend with Gutuo. Gutuo naturally did not use his cultivation base. He was only using his physical body to activate his sword skills to compete with Yiguchin. However, Yiguchin had a perfect physical body. Coupled with the dragon elephant strength, even if he did not use the indestructible Vajra body, his physical strength was not weaker than Gutuo's. However, as the two exchanged blows, Gutuo's expression changed drastically. From disdain, to bewilderment, to astonishment, and finally to shock. This was because he realized that the sword trajectory of the seemingly handsome young man in front of him could be said to be perfect. It was perfect, as if there was not a single flaw. Even the most ordinary sword skills could be turned into something magical in Yiguchin's hands. In addition, Yiguchin had comprehended the heart of sword, and his understanding of all kinds of sword skills had already reached a level where not a drop of water could leak out. Therefore, Gutuo was shocked to find that he could not completely suppress Yiguchin. Not only could he not completely suppress him, but Yiguchin could also find the flaws in his sword skills from time to time, and then break through them. Although Gutuo could rely on his many years of experience in sword practice to make up for it. However, this was tantamount to tearing down the east wall to fix the west wall. How is this possible? How is this kid's sword skills possible? Gutuo's heart was in turmoil. He did not dare to believe that this was the sword skills of a 17 or 18-year-old youth. If one ignored the youth's age and appearance, Gutuo even felt that he was fighting with a sword king whose cultivation base was exceedingly high. Gutuo was not the only one who was shocked. The spectating elders and deacons also saw the clues. They all widened their eyes, and their mouths were agape. This. Elder Shiyun, Elder Qinghe, and the others looked at each other. They could see the deep shock in each other's eyes. Ji Ling and the other inner court disciples also widened their eyes as they looked at the two people who were going back and forth in the arena. This was completely different from the one-sided crushing that they had imagined. As for the ordinary disciples, they could not see much, but they knew that the situation in front of them was different from what they had expected. Previously, there were people who had bet that Yiguchin would be able to last a few rounds. However, at this moment, everyone who did not think highly of Yiguchin was shocked speechlessly. Sometimes, there was no need for any explanation. Everything in front of them was the truth. Yiguchin's sword skills completely crushed Gutuo. Chapter 257. On the arena, the wind and clouds surged. The sword chi was unparalleled, and the sword light chilled the world. Gu Tuo had been immersed in the sword principle for decades. Although he had not comprehended the heart integrated into sword, his sword skills were far superior to ordinary people. Yi Guqin was a sword demon who could control the world with his sword. Coupled with the heart integrated into sword, Yi Guqin's sword skills were flawless, even if they were not perfect. Void sword technique, boundless heaven sword art, god-slaying sword technique, shadow kill sword technique, and Tai Chi sword technique. Although Yi Guqin did not use any genuine chi, his moves were as smooth as moving clouds and flowing water. There was no hesitation at all. The longer the fight went on, the more shocked Gu Tuos. His eyes were filled with disbelief. Even if he started cultivating in his mother's womb, his sword skills could not be so terrifying. Even with the heart integrated into sword, he could not be so strong. Gu Tuo could not accept it. A young man who was only 17 or 18 years old was not weaker than him, an old master in terms of sword skills. He was even stronger than him. At this moment, all the spectators felt as if they were in a dream. It was as if they had an illusion. If they did not talk about age, appearance, and identity, they would even think that Yi Guqin was the stronger one, and that he was giving pointers to his opponent's cultivation. This sort of misconception that their identities had been reversed caused everyone to feel that Yi Guqin was even more mysterious and unfathomable as they looked at him. How could it be? How could it be? Qin Lin, who was standing aside, was in a daze. She could not believe her eyes. Previously, she had naively thought that she would defeat Mu Xingzu and Gu Tuo would defeat Yi Guqin, giving him a fatal double blow. However, not only had she been defeated by Mu Xingzu, but Yi Guqin had also displayed extraordinary sword skills that were beyond his age. Even Gu Tuo could not suppress him. In addition, Yi Guqin had triggered the myriad sword chime. The miracles created by Yi Guqin had caused Qin Lin to lose her ability to think. The smile on her face grew stronger. However, at this moment, the person who wanted to curse the most was Gu Tuo, who was being suppressed by Yi Guqin's swordsmanship. Damn it! Damn it! How could this be? Could it be that some Sword Dao Grandmaster has taken a face-preserving pill? Damn it! If we were at the same level, I wouldn't be able to defeat him. At this moment, Gu Tuo's heart was filled with bitterness. He was shocked and furious, but he also felt a trace of powerlessness. To think that he had spoken so calmly just now, letting Yi Guqin know his place and take the initiative to back down. But now, it wasn't Yi Guqin who was caught between a rock and a hard place. Instead, it was him, an inner court elder. Clang! Yi Guqin thrusted his sword forward once more, grasping the perfect timing. Gu Tuo took another 2 steps back. Without using his cultivation, he was on the same level as Yi Guqin. Although the bodies of life and death chamber experts were powerful, it was also Yi Guqin's strong point. Therefore, when the two sides offset each other, the one with better sword skills would naturally have the upper hand. But now, Gu Tuo was clearly the one who was in a difficult situation. Yi Guqin held his sword. Every movement he made had the bearing of a grandmaster. If one were to ignore the cultivation realm and only talk about the realm of the Sword Dao, there was almost no one in the entire Sword Sect Pagoda Forest who could compare to Yi Guqin. The sword radiance flickered with a cold light. Although Gu Tuo had also used the Sword Sect's Talon's King-level sword art, without the support of his chi cultivation, he was unable to fully utilize its advantages. On the other hand, Yi Guqin also had a king-tier sword technique like the god-slaying sword technique. Therefore, as time passed, Gu Tuo was completely suppressed by Yi Guqin's sword skills. This scene completely overturned everyone's understanding of the world. A disciple's sword skills had suppressed an elder. Yi Guqin, this old man has been reckless in this battle. Why don't we stop here? Gu Tuo secretly transmitted his voice as the sword radiance clashed. If he had not been forced into a corner, Gu Tuo would not have lowered his face like this. However, compared to showing weakness to Yi Guqin, Gu Tuo could not accept being defeated by Yi Guqin in front of so many people. This was a fatal blow to his reputation as an inner court elder. Stop here? Elder Gu Tuo, at the beginning, I have been conceding. Have you ever been more lenient? Now that we have decided to fight, How can we stop here? Yi Guchen spoke. He did not lower his voice, nor did he try to hide it. Everyone around him could hear him. Many elders, deacons, and disciples heard Yi Guchen's words and were puzzled for a moment. Then they all turned to look at Gu Tuo. Under everyone's strange gazes, Gu Tuo felt a chill down his spine. He cursed in his heart, but on the surface, he revealed a shocked and angry expression. Yi Guchen, your words are too ridiculous. Elder Guto, it's over. Yi Guchen did not want to say anything more. His eyes suddenly flashed. He once again used a sword technique, combining his essence, qi, and spirit. At the same time, he merged it with his brilliant sword heart. Although this sword technique did not have the support of Zhen Qi, its mysterious trajectory made it impossible for Gu Tuo to dodge. I will lose. Gu Tuo's heart sank as he suddenly thought. However, Yi Guchen's sword was already in front of him. Almost subconsciously, Gu Tuo blocked with his sword while bursting with Zhen Qi. The aura of a life and death chamber expert was extremely powerful. Moreover, Yi Guchen did not have the slightest bit of Zhen Qi cultivation. Puchi. Zhen Qi ripples spread out, directly causing the meteor soft sword to be blown away. Yi Guchen, who was caught off guard, was also hit directly. His chest cracked and his ribs cracked. He spat out a mouthful of blood, and his body flew backward like a kite with its string cut. This sudden scene caused everyone to be stunned for a moment. Mu Xingzu's face was pale as she cried out in alarm. Almost at the same time when Gu Tuo burst with Zhen Qi, a dark light flashed in his eyes. Yi Guchen, since you are heartless, don't blame this old man for being unjust. Since your Zhen Qi has been crippled, then be at ease and be a cripple. It had to be said that Gu Tuo was really jealous of Yi Guchen. The tallest tree in the forest would be destroyed by the wind. If one was too stunning, it would make people want to kill him. Of course, with Elder Gu Tuo's status, he would not kill him. His figure once again moved forward, and his sword pierced toward Yi Guchen. Gu Tuo had already made up his mind. He would not kill Yi Guchen, but he could still severely injure his bones and tendons. No one expected Gu Tuo to make a move again. Just as Elder Qin he was about to make a move, a ray of sword qi seemed to have come from the heavens, and it directly fell between Yi Guchen and Gu Tuo. Feeling the power of the sword qi, Gu Tuo's face was filled with shock, and his figure suddenly stopped. Boom! The sword qi directly landed on the stage, and the stage, which was covered with defensive arrays, was directly shattered into two halves by the sword qi. It should be known that even a life and death chamber expert would not be able to destroy the defensive arrays of the stage. Thinking of this, Gu Tuo's face suddenly turned pale. Not far away in the sky, a handsome middle-aged man in plain clothes stepped through the void. It was the obscure Sword King, Feng Manlu. It's Lord Feng Manlu. Senior Feng Manlu. Feng Manlu was one of the 3 leaders of the Sword Sect Pagoda Association, and also one of the 3 great experts. He was a legendary sword cultivator that everyone respected. He could be said to be one of the spiritual symbols of the Sword Sect Pagoda Association. After all, Feng Manlu was once the youngest divine dwelling king expert in the Saint Origin dynasty. Everyone present, regardless of whether they were elders, deacons, outer yard or inner yard disciples, bowed respectfully to Feng Manlu, who had just arrived. However, the gentle Feng Manlu, who always had a faint smile at the corners of his mouth, suddenly turned his empty eyes to Gu Tuo. Gu Tuo, have guts. Feng Manlu's tone was very indifferent, as if there was not a trace of anger. But this made Gu Tuo's face even paler. He directly knelt down and said in a trembling voice, Lord Feng Manlu, it's Gu Tuo's fault. I lost control of my qi and accidentally injured this junior. Lost control of qi? Accidentally injured? Hearing such despicable words, Mu Xingzu, Chu Qingqi and the others all had anger in their eyes. As life and death chamber experts, they had long been proficient in the use of their qi. How could they lose control of their qi? It was the first time they had seen such a shameless person. Are you sure? Although Feng Manlu's tone was indifferent, the surrounding temperature seemed to slowly drop. On the other side of the arena, Yi Guchen slowly stood up. His chest was in severe pain. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth with one hand, his eyes cold. If Feng Manlu had not intervened, even if he did not die, he would have been seriously injured. In the worst case, his meridians would have been destroyed, and he would no longer have the possibility to cultivate. And at this moment, Gu Tuo, who was being questioned by Feng Manlu, felt the surrounding temperature slowly drop. His back was drenched in cold sweat, and he swallowed dryly, his throat moving. However, just as Gu Tuo was about to be unable to withstand Feng Manlu's questioning, another figure slowly walked over from the distance and spoke in an old voice. "Ah, Feng Manlu, why are you so serious?" The figure was a white-robed old man with white hair and beard. He walked over in the void with a heavy aura. There were only 2 people in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest who could directly call Feng Manlu by his name. Other than Yen Chang'e, there was only one other person. Great Elder Qiu Shan. Chapter 258. Great Elder Qiu Shan was one of the 3 people in charge of the Sword Sect's Forest of Pagodas. Because Yen Chang'e was away all year round, and Feng Manlu was in seclusion in the Sword Sect Pagodas. Therefore, the person in charge of many affairs in the Sword Sect Pagodas was the Great Elder Qiu Shan. Yi Guchen slowly scrunched his brows, studying the Great Elder of the Sword Sect Pagodas. It had to be said that his aura, which was as deep as the sea, was indeed far from what Gu Tuo and the others could compare to. His aura was similar to that of the Sun Moon Hall Master of the Limitless Sword Sect, Xiantai. They were both experts who had taken half a step into the divine dwelling stage. However, when they first entered the Sword Sect Pagodas, Chu Qingqi had warned Yi Guchen that the Great Elder was quite displeased with him monopolizing the venerable cave dwelling. Therefore, Yi Guchen was secretly vigilant against Qiu Shan at this moment. He even believed that Gu Tuo had secretly received Qiu Shan's instructions to test him. While Yi Guchen was studying Qiu Shan, the Great Elder also cast his gaze towards him. Although Qiu Shan's hair and beard were all white, his skin was as smooth as a baby's, and his eyes were very bright. He didn't look like an old man at all. At this moment, he looked at Yi Guchen without the slightest doubt or disgust on his face. Instead, he said with a faint smile, "As expected, heroes come from the young. At such a young age, your sword skills are not inferior to Gu Tuo's. In the future, you will be a pillar of the Sword Sect Pagodas." Hearing Qiu Shan's words, Yi Guchen also slowly scrunched his brows. Although Qiu Shan seemed to be praising him, he had changed the topic and didn't mention that Gu Tuo had injured him. "Qiu Shan, Gu Tuo is a member of your faction. What do you think of his actions?" Feng Manlu's tone was indifferent. Qiu Shan's expression didn't change as he shook his head. "Gu Tuo is indeed wrong. As an elder, he made such a ridiculous challenge. I will send him to the Reflection Cave and punish him." Reflection Cave. Hearing Qiu Shan's words, many disciples below broke out into discussion. The Reflection Cave was generally a place where disciples who had committed a crime would be punished. It was the first time that an elder had entered it. However, when Yi Guchen heard these words, his heart suddenly sank. On the other side, even though Gu Tuo's expression was extremely unsightly, it was obvious that this situation was much better than he had expected. As an elder, releasing Zhenqi in the midst of a battle and injuring a disciple, it was only natural for him to be punished severely. However, it was clear that Qiu Shan was protecting Gu Tuo. However, the inner and outer court disciples were discussing how wise the Great Elder was. Because it was the first time an elder had entered the Reflection Cave, many disciples believed that Qiu Shan treated both elders and disciples equally. "Qiu Shan, is this punishment appropriate?" Feng Manlu asked coldly. "After this, I will properly warn him and help him sort out his disordered true qi meridians." Qiu Shan's tone was indifferent. However, his words clearly admitted to Gu Tuo's earlier claim that he had lost control of his true energy. The tone of the 2 experts from the Sword Sect and Tower Forest was indifferent, but there was a hidden sharpness. "Qiu Shan, you're on your own now." Feng Manlu took a step forward and appeared in front of Yi Guchen in the next moment. "Senior." Yi Guchen cupped his hands slightly. Feng Manlu did not say anything else. He stretched out his hand and patted Yiguchen's back. An extremely pure and warm Jinqi flowed into Yiguchen's body. After circulating in his meridians for a few cycles, it completely healed all the accumulated injuries in Yiguchen's body. Not only that, but the heavy injuries on his body had also recovered by more than half. "Thank you, Senior." Yiguchen cupped his hands and his eyes were filled with joy. Feng Manla's action was more effective than any supreme-grade elixir. After that, Yiguchen only needed to consume some supreme-grade elixirs to recuperate and his injuries would be healed in no time. Qiu Shan, who was in midair, saw this and his eyes were filled with deep meaning. He waved his hand and a few dazzling supreme-grade elixirs fell towards Yiguchen. "Yiguchen, take these supreme-grade elixirs and heal your injuries as soon as possible." Qiu Shan smiled faintly. As expected of the Great Elder. He is so benevolent. Yes, the Great Elder has always been concerned about us disciples. With the Great Elder Qiu Shan leading us, the Sword Sect's Tower Forest will grow stronger. Seeing Qiu Shan's action, the surrounding disciples started to discuss again. However, it was obvious that they were praising Qiu Shan. Yiguchen took the elixirs and his expression did not change. He looked at Qiu Shan and said, "Then I thank you, Great Elder, for your kindness." Yiguchen slightly emphasized the words "thank you." It had to be said that Qiu Shan's cultivation and shrewdness were far superior to Gu Tuo. With a few words, not only did he save Gu Tuo, but he also established his image and made people respect him. Yiguchen was in awe of Li Mu's ability. Qiu Shan changed the topic and said, "Yiguchen, heal your injuries as soon as possible. After all, the inner courtyard ranking battle is in 2 months. You have received special treatment from Feng Manlu and become the 5th disciple of the inner courtyard. However, if you do not have the strength to match it, the other inner courtyard disciples might feel resentful." "It's coming." Yiguchen's eyes dimmed. These words were Qiu Shan's true motive. Sure enough, when Qiu Shan's words were spoken, the outer academy disciples were still fine. However, the inner academy disciples, including Li Lingxiao and Ting Jingshan, all threw doubtful and disdainful gazes at Yiguchen and Feng Manlu. Qiu Shan had said that Feng Manlu had given special treatment to Yiguchen. "Qiu Shan, Yiguchen is the champion of the elite gathering and the 5th disciple of the inner courtyard. Do you have any objections?" Feng Manlu placed his hands behind his back, his empty eyes looking towards Qiu Shan. Qiu Shan's white eyebrows wrinkled slightly. Although he had taken half a step into the divine dwelling stage, he was still somewhat fearful of Feng Manlu, who had comprehended the unity of man and sword. "I have no objections. However, Yiguchen's qi has been crippled. Even if he is ranked 5th in the inner courtyard, he will not be able to convince the masses. As the first elder of the Sword Sect's Tower Forest, I cannot only take care of one person. I have to take care of everyone. The little guys in the inner courtyard must have some resentment in their hearts." Qiu Shan's words were clear and reasonable. He had practically pulled all the inner courtyard disciples to the opposite side of Yiguchen. Yiguchen could even feel the hostile gazes of the inner courtyard disciples, including Li Lingxiao and Ting Jingshan. After all, with Yiguchen's arrival, the rankings of the inner courtyard disciples below the 5th place would be lowered by 1 place. Qiu Shan's simple words had caused Yiguchen to fall into an isolated situation in the inner courtyard. "Just because you want the venerable cave dwelling behind me, you have to resort to such means, Qiu Shan." Yiguchen's heart turned cold as he looked at Qiu Shan. If he was the only one who received hostility from the inner courtyard disciples, Yiguchen could see that Li Lingxiao and the others were also casting dissatisfied and suspicious gazes at Feng Manlu. Evidently, in their eyes, Feng Manlu was biased towards Yiguchen. This would have some impact on Feng Manlu's reputation in the Sword Sect's Tower Forest. Yiguchen could ignore himself and his ranking, but he could not ignore Feng Manlu's appreciation and guidance for him. Listening to the faint discussions of the many disciples and elders around him, Yiguchen's eyes turned cold as he took a step forward. This action attracted everyone's attention. "Elder Qiu Shan, why are you beating around the bush? Don't you want the venerable cave dwelling behind me?" Yiguchen did not avoid the topic and directly said, As soon as these words came out, a look of surprise flashed across the eyes of the crowd. The venerable cave dwelling was indeed coveted by many people, but they only dared to talk about it behind his back. This was because Feng Manlu had personally promised it to Yiguchen. Yiguchen, what do you mean? I'm just stating the facts. Qiu Shan did not care and was not even angry. Yiguchen smiled coldly and said directly, since the great elder is stating the facts, then I will also be stating the facts. Today, I hereby swear, I, Yiguchen, swear that if I can't rely on my own strength to maintain the 5th place in the inner courtyard ranking battle in 2 months, then, Yiguchen's eyes were deep as he paused for a moment before he spoke again. I'm willing to hand over the venerable cave dwelling unconditionally and leave the Sword Sect Tower Forest. I'll never step into the Sword Sect Tower Forest again. Chapter 259. Yiguchen's words were undoubtedly like a huge rock falling into the ocean, setting off huge waves in the square. The discussions among the disciples and elders took place. Yiguchen's words undoubtedly pierced through that layer of window paper. Since he came to the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, although most people treated him with respect, there were also many people who thought that Yiguchen's cultivation was crippled and it would be difficult for his strength to improve. With Yiguchen's condition, not only was he still ranked 5th in the inner yard, but he could even occupy a venerable one's cave dwelling. This undoubtedly made some people unhappy. Amongst them, most of them were inner court disciples. They were not like the outer yard disciples who blindly respected Yiguchen. They believed that strength was the most important thing. Only those who were truly powerful could gain their recognition and respect. Other than that, reputation was useless. Feng Manlu's guidance and appreciation were also regarded as favoritism and special treatment among the arrogant inner yard disciples. Yiguchen had been in the inner yard for a period of time and could occasionally hear such discussions in secret. Although he did not care about reputation, Yiguchen was a little annoyed to be talked about like this every day and even dragged Feng Manlu into it. Qiu Shan's scheme was undoubtedly to make Yiguchen say those words and force him into a dead end. Yiguchen beat him at his own game and pushed the boat with the current, directly going along with Qiu Shan's plan. After hearing Yiguchen's words, although Qiu Shan's expression did not change much, the corners of his mouth faintly curled up into a faint arc. He opened his mouth and said, Yiguchen, you are indeed a sword genius. I have never forced you to leave the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. You have to think twice before you act. Moreover, the inner yard ranking battle will not be like today, where it will only be a competition of sword skills. At that time, there will be no restrictions on any means, true energy, soul power, sword skills, or secret techniques. You have to think carefully. After all, your true energy is crippled. As soon as Qiu Shan said that, the surrounding elders and disciples secretly frowned and sighed. If Yiguchen was at his peak, no one would dare to object to his current status and resources. However, his Junshi had been crippled and he had lost all of his potential. This was Yiguchen's fatal flaw. This was also the reason why many inner court disciples were dissatisfied. Even though Yiguchen had once created a miracle, that was all in the past. In the eyes of these proud inner courtyard disciples, Yiguchen was nothing more than a cripple. Even today, Yiguchen had defeated Gu Tuo with his amazing sword skills, shocking everyone. However, the inner court ranking battle wasn't purely a competition of sword skills. Cultivation realm and strength were the strongest means. Everyone knew that if they really used their true energy, not to mention Gu Tuo, even an ordinary inner yard disciple with a 3rd transformation of the divine soul realm could easily defeat Yiguchen without any true energy. Of course, this was just everyone's guess. After all, ever since Yiguchen entered the inner court, he hadn't really fought with anyone. Yiguchen, you made this vow yourself. You can't go back on your words. At this moment, the blue-shirt young man, Ting Jingshan, spoke with a disdainful look in his eyes. Ting Jingshan. Yiguchen looked over. Ting Jingshan's cultivation was at the 4th transformation of the divine soul realm and he was ranked 11th in the inner court. His strength couldn't be underestimated. Moreover, he had a deep grudge against Yiguchen. Yiguchen, Your sword skills have indeed surprised me. However, so what? In the inner court ranking battle, I, Li Lingxiao, will let everyone know that you are just a clown, Li Lingxiao said coldly. He had already said that he would take back everything he had lost in the inner court ranking battle. This naturally included the 5th place in the inner court. When they saw the inner court disciples jump out one by one to question and ridicule him, no matter if it was Mu Xingzhu or the outer court disciples who viewed Yiguchen as their idol, they felt extremely uncomfortable in their hearts and cried out for Yiguchen. TSK, Yiguchen is rather unpopular in the inner court. On the other side, Jiling clicked her tongue and shook her head. She didn't jump out. Moreover, she was ranked 4th, so she didn't have any conflict of interest with Yiguchen. But why do I keep feeling a faint threat from him? What other tricks does this sword sect master have up his sleeves? Ji Ling faintly frowned as she thought in her heart. Yiguchen stood in the middle of the crowd with his hands behind his back. He was like a pillar of stability as he faced the complicated gazes of the crowd. His aura was heavy and he didn't move at all. Yiguchen, since you're so insistent, then I won't say anything. If you're able to maintain the top 5 in the inner court during the ranking battle 2 months from now, then I promise you that you can choose any one of the sword sect's Pagoda Lin's king-class sword techniques. Not only that, you'll become the leader of the inner court disciples just like Yan Wushuang. If you fail, then you'll follow your oath. Qiu Shan waved his hand slightly. Qiu Shan's words had undoubtedly completely settled the situation. Whether Yiguchen would stay or leave during the inner court ranking battle 2 months from now, and whether he would amaze the world with a single brilliant feat or disappear would be revealed very soon. After that, Qiu Shan took a deep look at Yiguchen, shook his head slightly, and left directly. Yiguchen is indeed a young man. He's showing off his abilities and jumping into the pit with just a little provocation. If it were me, I would endure for a while and look for a chance to turn things around. Heh, it's easy to break when you're too strong. No one noticed that Qiu Shan, who had his back facing the crowd, had a deep smile on his face. Qiu Shan had already planned for Yiguchen's venerable realm cave. However, he couldn't do anything to Yiguchen because of Feng Manlu. Therefore, he could only use this method to force Yiguchen to hand over the venerable realm cave. He didn't think that Yiguchen could win. In fact, most people didn't think that Yiguchen could win. Even though Yiguchen's swordsmanship had shocked everyone today, in a real competition, one's cultivation realm was still the most important thing. As the saying went, a strong person could defeat 10 skilled people. In the eyes of the crowd, no matter how good Yiguchen's swordsmanship was, he would not be able to resist at all if he was directly crushed by a person with a profound cultivation base. It was also because of this that most of the inner yard disciples looked at Yiguchen with a faint look of pity. After Qiu Shan left, Feng Manlu said calmly, "Yiguchen, come to the sword sect pagoda when you're free in the future." Yiguchen nodded slightly. Feng Manlu also left. "Senior brother Yi." As soon as Feng Manlu left, Mu Xingzhu went forward. Her beautiful eyes were filled with worry and heartache. The Grand Elder, Elder Gu Tuo, and the inner yard disciples were all high and mighty figures in Mu Xingzhu's eyes. However, all of them were pressuring Yiguchen. "Xingzhu, I'm fine." Although Yiguchen's injuries were mostly healed by Feng Manlu, his handsome face was still slightly pale. He took a deep look at Gu Tuo. Gu Tuo actually felt a little guilty when Yiguchen looked at him. "Elder Gu Tuo, do you still remember our bet?" Yiguchen asked in a strange tone. "This." Gu Tuo's face turned pale when he heard this. He actually froze on the spot for a moment. The surrounding elders and disciples also looked over. They had clearly heard the previous bet. Gu Tuo had even made a solemn vow that if he lost to Yiguchen, he would kneel down and kowtow 3 times to acknowledge Yiguchen as his master. When he made the bet, Gu Tuo did not think that he would lose at all. He felt that it was impossible. However, his arrogant action back then had now caused him to be in a difficult position. At this moment, Gu Tuo felt as if there was a knife at his back. Although no one dared to casually mock Gu Tuo because of his status as an elder, a strange sneer flashed across the disciples' eyes from time to time. This caused Gu Tuo's old face to burn. He was so depressed that he had the urge to vomit blood. Looking at Gu Tuo's attitude, Yi Guchen shook his head slightly. He also did not think that Gu Tuo would really fulfill the bet. Just as Gu Tuo was about to find an excuse to refuse, Yi Guchen suddenly shook his head and sighed. It seems that Elder Gu Tuo does not want to fulfill the bet. However, I did not consider accepting you as my disciple. After all, you are a loser. Moreover, you are too old and your aptitude is poor. I feel that Mu Xingzu seems to be 10,000 times better than you. Moreover, she is very considerate. When Yi Guchen said this, Gu Tuo was stunned on the spot. He actually compared him to a little girl. Moreover, he could not compare to her? At this moment, some of the surrounding disciples covered their mouths with their hands as if they could not hold back their laughter. However, there was a faint trace of mockery in their eyes when they looked at Gu Tuo. If today's matter were to spread, his reputation as an inner court elder would be completely ruined. Boy! Gu Tuo's blood rushed to his head. Due to the congestion of blood, his old face turned red. There was even a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. Yi Guchen ignored the angry Gu Tuo and turned his cold eyes to stare at Qin Lin. Qin Lin's face turned as pale as a sheet when she was stared at by Yi Guchen. Qin Lin, I have said that I want to see the worldly variant thunder within 5 days. If I don't see it... Yi Guchen paused. Although he did not say anything, it made Qin Lin's face turn even paler. Deep in her heart, she hated Yi Guchen. Deep in her eyes, there was also a bone-deep resentment. However, she did not dare to show it. The worldly variant thunder was originally something that Qin Lin had obtained. She would have the opportunity to refine it after she made a breakthrough in her cultivation. However, at this moment, she had to give it up to Yi Guchen because of the bet. How could Qin Lin not feel resentful? Uncle Qin Baijian will not allow me to give you the worldly variant thunder. Qin Lin forced herself to open her mouth and clenched her teeth. Qin Baijian will not stop you. Yi Guchen's eyes dimmed as he said with deep meaning. Qin Lin must have been staying in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest and had not returned to the Qin clan. Therefore, she did not know about Qin Baijian's situation. Qin Baijian was still farming in Lotus Village. How could he stop Qin Lin from obtaining the worldly variant thunder? Also, Yi Guchen's gaze swept across the group of Inner Yard disciples again. For some reason, the group of Inner Yard disciples felt a chill in their hearts when Yi Guchen's deep eyes swept across them. In 2 months, I, Yi Guchen, will not hold back at all in the Inner Yard ranking battle. All of you, take care of yourselves. Yi Guchen's expression was cold. He flung his sleeve and left. Mu Xingzu followed closely behind, leaving behind the group of Inner Yard disciples with a stunned expression. Chapter 260. Who does this Yi Guchen think he is? He actually dares to speak to us in such a tone. Yeah, a person who only knows how to talk tough and make such a ridiculous oath is destined to be chased out of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. After seeing Yi Guchen leave, some of the inner court disciples spoke out angrily. Of course, there were also some inner court disciples who remained silent and reserved their attitudes. Yi Guchen is really arrogant. Does he really think that he's invincible just because he obtained the title of Sword Sect? Teng Jingshan's tone was cold and extremely disdainful. The more he speaks like this today, the more ridiculous a clown he'll be when the ranking battle starts in the future. Let's see how he'll leave the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest in dejection after he fails. Li Lingxiao sneered and shook his head. He didn't say anything else. Sigh, today's matter is really exciting. I'll tell Shuang when I go back. I'm looking forward to the ranking battle in 2 months. What kind of surprise will this Yi Guchen bring? Ji Ling stretched lazily, revealing her charming figure. The group of inner court disciples also dispersed amidst the clamor of discussion. As everyone left, the outer court ranking battle that had been full of twists and turns finally came to an end. However, not only did the fiery atmosphere not weaken, it became even more fiery because of Yi Guchen's oath. If he couldn't guarantee a top 5 ranking, he would take the initiative to hand over the Venerable One's cave and leave the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, never to take a step back. Such an oath, coming from the mouth of Yi Guchen, who had lost all his true energy, naturally attracted discussion. The entire Sword Sect Pagoda forest was enthusiastically discussing Yi Guchen's matter. However, the result was unexpectedly the same. 2 months later, the probability of Yi Guchen being chased out of the Sword Sect Pagoda forest was about 90%. In other words, 90% of the people thought that Yi Guchen would fail and leave. Even the outer court disciples who saw Yi Guchen as a role model for sword cultivators were mostly very worried and didn't think highly of Yi Guchen. After all, cultivation was the foundation of a martial artist. On peak number 5, Yi Guchen sat cross-legged in his residence. As he adjusted his breathing, the medicinal effects of the various supreme-grade treasured herbs also completely dissolved within his body. After 2 hours, Yi Guchen opened his eyes. "I've finally recovered from my injuries," Yi Guchen muttered. 3 days had passed since the outer domain ranking battle. During these 3 days, Yi Guchen had also stayed in his residence, using supreme-quality elixirs to heal his injuries. With the help of Feng Manlu and the nourishment of top-grade elixirs, Yi Guchen's injuries were finally fully healed. Gu Tuo really didn't leave any leeway when he attacked. Yi Guchen's pitch-black eyes were filled with coldness. Without Feng Manlu's help, even with his perfect body, he wouldn't have been able to withstand the sudden attack of a life-and-death chamber warrior. The most important thing is still the strength of the realm. If I hadn't been poisoned by the spirit star-devouring worm, I'm sure those inner domain disciples wouldn't have dared to be so presumptuous, Yi Guchen muttered to himself. He looked inside himself and found that the Qi-Si in his dantian was still in a sealed state. However, he could also vaguely feel that the gu-venomous insect in his Qi-Si seemed to be gradually undergoing unpredictable changes as it absorbed Yi Guchen's vital energy every day. Gu Xiaoyang doesn't know that I have a Qi-Si of 1,000 feet, so he probably doesn't know what kind of changes the spirit star-devouring worm will undergo after absorbing enough genuine Qi, Yi Guchen thought to himself. However, he had a feeling that the worm would bring him an unexpected surprise. Right now, the most important thing is to pass the third spiritual tribulation. There are still 2 days before the deadline of the Heavenly Thunder, but before that, I'd better make a trip to the Sword Sect Pagoda, Yi Guchen thought as he stood up and headed to the Sword Sect Pagoda. Feng Manlu had previously said that if he had time, he should make a trip to the Sword Sect Pagoda. Not long after, Yi Guchen arrived at the Sword Sect Pagoda. The ancient and majestic stone pagoda stood on top of the mountain. The Sword Sect Pagoda opened once a month. When the pagoda was closed, almost no disciples would come here. Therefore, Yi Guchen's journey was peaceful and quiet. There were no inner yard disciples pointing at him from afar. As soon as Yi Guchen approached the Sword Sect Pagoda, he saw Feng Manlu's figure. He stood on the stone eaves outside the stone pagoda and seemed to be lost in thought as he stared into the distance. However, Yi Guchen knew that Feng Manlu was blind and could not see much. At this moment, Yi Guchen seemed to have realized that Feng Manlu was actually a lonely expert. He stood under the Sword Sect Pagoda and did not disturb Feng Manlu. After a while, Feng Manlu seemed to have come back to his senses. He landed and said with a faint smile, "You're here." "Senior, what do you want to tell me?" Yi Guchen asked. "Do you mind if I give you the token of being ranked 5th in the inner yard?" Feng Manlu suddenly asked. "I don't mind. I'm a sword cultivator, and I want to reach the peak of the sword principle with the heart of a powerhouse. Such an obstacle is not worth mentioning." Yi Guchen's tone was steady and firm. "Not bad, I didn't misjudge you. It seems that you're very confident in the inner yard battle in 2 months. Feng Manlu smiled. "If I'm not confident, I wouldn't dare to boast," Yi Guchen said. "All right, I'm not worried about the ranking battle. The reason why I asked you to come here is that I've told you before that I need your help with something," Feng Manlu said. "Senior, please tell me." Yi Guchen nodded slightly. Feng Manlu had taken good care of him. If Feng Manlu needed his help, he would not refuse. "Do you know about the Forbidden Violet Mountain?" Feng Manlu suddenly asked. The Forbidden Violet Mountain is rumored to be the most majestic mountain in the Saint Origin Empire. Moreover, the mountain is made of solid purple gold rock that can withstand the attacks of experts. Therefore, The Forbidden Violet Mountain has always been the place where the many peerless experts of the Empire duel. Yi Guqin knew a little about the Forbidden Violet Mountain. 10 years ago, I had a battle with Emperor Blade Yu Bufan at the peak of the Forbidden Violet Mountain. Feng Manlu sighed. Emperor Blade Yu Bufan? Yi Guqin's eyes were filled with astonishment. The reason why he was surprised was because the current deputy palace master of the Saber-Sealing King Palace was Emperor Blade Yu Bufan. Yu Bufan was currently one of the top experts of the 7 great factions. Even amongst the divine dwelling stage experts, he was considered one of the most powerful. I wonder what the result was? Yi Guqin was very curious about the battle between such peerless experts. After all, Feng Manlu was once a divine dwelling expert, the Lightless Sword King. That battle ended in a draw. Both of us were seriously injured. However, after that, I was ambushed by a black-clothed masked expert. Feng Manlu shook his head. A black-clothed masked expert? Yi Guqin frowned. Although he was masked, his identity was clear. He was the master of the Limitless Sword Sect, Xian Wuji. Feng Manlu's tone was indifferent, but his words made Yi Guqin incomparably astonished. A battle between peerless experts was sacred and transcendent, but Xian Wuji had secretly ambushed Feng Manlu after he was seriously injured. If news of such actions were to spread, it would definitely be despised by everyone. Yi Guqin finally understood why the Sword Sect Pagoda Association and the Limitless Sword Sect hated each other so much. It turned out that there had always been such a deep conflict between the 2 great sections. Feng Manlu, as the spiritual example of the Sword Sect Pagoda Association, had been ambushed by Xian Wuji and caused his cultivation to fall. This hatred naturally made the disciples of the Sword Sect Pagoda Association despise the Limitless Sword Sect. Senior, you were the youngest divine dwelling expert back then, and that must have caused Xian Wuji to be wary of you, so he decided to take action. Yi Guqin immediately understood. As the #1 sword sect in the Saint Origin Empire, how could the Limitless Sword Sect sit back and watch Feng Manlu rise? It was also because of Xian Wuji that my Qi Si and Divine Dwelling were destroyed, and my cultivation level fell off the Heaven and Earth Spirit Bridge. But I still have an obsession in my heart. I want to fight with Yu Bufan to determine the winner. Unfortunately, Yu Bufan is just as stubborn. He believes that my cultivation level has fallen and can't fight fairly. So, Yi Guqin seemed to have guessed something. Therefore, Yu Bufan and I agreed to use another method to determine the winner. That is to find a successor. 10 years later, at the top of the Forbidden City, we will have a sword and saber duel again. And now, the 10 years deadline is not far away. Feng Manlu said with deep meaning. Chapter 261. I understand. Yi Guqin nodded. You understand? Feng Manlu was surprised. I will head to the Forbidden Violet Mountain to battle the successor of the Imperial Blade, Yi Guqin said indifferently. Yi Guqin, I don't think you know who Yu Bufan's successor is, Feng Manlu said. I really don't know, Yi Guqin said honestly. Yu Bufan's successor is the current #1 on the Heavenly Blade list, Prime Sovereign Saber Maniac, Feng Manlu said. It's him? Yi Guqin raised his eyebrows. Although he had never seen Prime Sovereign before, his reputation as the #1 on the Heavenly Blade list was like thunder to his ears. It was said that Prime Sovereign loved the blade as much as his life. His obsession with the blade was the deepest among all the blade cultivators in the Saber-Sealing Monarch Palace. Therefore, he was recognized by Yu Bufan and became the successor of the Imperial Blade. As Yu Bufan's successor, Prime Sovereign Saber Maniac has inherited all of Yu Bufan's teachings. In addition, his cultivation of blade techniques is like a crazy demon. To be honest, even Shuang doesn't have much of a chance of winning against him, Feng Manlu said bluntly. Yi Guqin pondered. Yan Wushuang was a sky pride comparable to Xian Hao, but in Feng Manlu's opinion, she didn't have much of a chance of winning against Prime Sovereign. And Yi Guqin's strength was clearly inferior to Yan Wushuang's. However, Yi Guqin wasn't afraid in the slightest. On the contrary, the stronger the opponent, the more it stimulated his sword Dao heart. Prime Sovereign Saber Maniac, such an opponent has piqued my interest. Senior, please let me know on the day of the battle. I, Yiguchen, will definitely attend the battle on the Forbidden Violet Mountain. Yiguchen's pitch-black eyes flashed with fighting spirit. Yiguchen of the Sword Sect. Prime Sovereign Saber Maniac. A sword cultivator who lived by the sword and a saber cultivator who used the saber as his companion. The battle at the top of the Forbidden City should be very exciting. Yiguchen was not afraid at all. Instead, he felt his blood boiling. As expected of the Sword Sect. I, Feng Manlu, have not misjudged you. You will fight on the Violet Peak. However, your current strength is far from being Gu Zun's match. Feng Manlu said. I have my own ways to increase my strength, Yiguchen said. Alright, you can go first. Feng Manlu nodded slightly. I'll take my leave. Yiguchen cupped his fists at Feng Manlu and turned to leave. Feng Manlu's empty eyes turned towards Yiguchen's departing figure, as if he was deep in thought. It's been 10 years, Yubufan. The battle between the sword and the saber has finally come to an end. Feng Manlu sighed. His empty eyes seemed to be reminiscing about that night at the top of the Forbidden City. That night was a shocking battle between the Sword King and the Imperial Blade. That night, the sword light and the saber light illuminated the night as if it was daytime. That battle was also a peak battle that shook the entire Saint Origin dynasty. If possible, Feng Manlu would like to personally write the ending of the battle between the saber and the sword. Unfortunately, his cultivation realm had fallen. Even though he had comprehended the union of man and sword, Yubufan was still unwilling to rely on his cultivation realm to fight him. As for letting Yubufan suppress his cultivation realm, Feng Manlu was unwilling to do so. Therefore, the only way was to let the successors of the two battle. When the battle at the top of the Forbidden City arrives, it will definitely be a battle between the Heaven's Prides that will shake the entire Saint Origin dynasty. It will also be a life-and-death battle between a sword cultivator and a saber cultivator. Feng Manlu took a deep breath, as if he was trying to calm down the surging emotions in his heart. Would this battle be the saber dominating the universe or the sword moving the mountains and rivers? Feng Manlu was looking forward to it. Number 5 Peak. Yiguchen returned to his residence. He was thinking about the battle at the top of the Forbidden City. It seems like I have to make a breakthrough quickly. Whether it's the inner sect ranking battle 2 months later, the battle at the top of the Forbidden City, or the search for the sacred medicine in the 5 elemental land, I have to raise my strength to the highest level. Yiguchen muttered to himself. However, in order to make a breakthrough, he had to first pass the spiritual tribulation in his Qi-Si and tear the seal on the spirit-devouring insect's Qi-Si. There are still 2 days left. Qinlin, you better know what's good for you. Yiguchen's eyes flashed coldly. He did not need Qinlin to be his maid, but the heavenly lightning was something that he must obtain. If Qinlin really did not know what was good for her, Yiguchen would teach her an unforgettable lesson. 2 days passed as time went by. On the 5th day after the outer sect ranking battle, Yiguchen, who was sitting cross-legged, slowly opened his eyes. It was already the last day, but Qinlin still had not delivered the heavenly lightning. Are you trying to renege on your debt? Yiguchen chuckled, but there was a hint of coldness in his laughter. He pushed open the door and walked into the courtyard. Not far away, Mu Xingzu, who had just returned from sword practice in the bamboo forest, saw Yiguchen, who had been in seclusion for 5 days, come out. She also had a surprised smile on her face. Senior brother Yi, have you finally recovered from your injuries? Mu Xingzu went forward and asked with concern. She had just finished sword practice, and there was still fragrant sweat on her snow-white forehead. Her aqua-green gauze dress clung to the curves of her body, and there was a kind of pure charm that made one's heart palpitate with eagerness. Although Mu Xingzu had become an inner sect disciple and had her own residence, she still lived in Yiguchen's peak number 5. My injuries are no longer serious. I have to go out for a while, Yiguchen said with a faint smile. Senior brother, where are you going? Mu Xingzu asked curiously. I'm looking for Qinlin, to settle my debt. Yiguchen's eyes were cold, and he whistled with his hand. Not long after, the divine condor flew over from afar. Not only that, but there was also an elegant white crane beside it. Caw, what business do you have with Grandpa Condor? The divine condor flapped its wings and landed, stirring up a gust of wind. The inner sect was picturesque and filled with spiritual chi. It was clear that the divine condor had been living a comfortable life during this period of time. Look, junior brother Yi, this is Grandpa Condor's Tao partner. Look at how white her feathers are, and look at her long, slender, red legs. The divine condor proudly introduced to Yiguchen, as if it was showing off the beauty of its Tao partner. However, Yiguchen was speechless as he looked at the white crane beside the divine condor. On the other hand, Mu Xingzhu, who was standing at the side, burst into laughter. Brother Condor, I need your help. Come with me to find Qin Linu, Yiguchen said. He brought the divine condor with him just in case. Moreover, Yiguchen believed that since Qin Lin dared to not come, she must have something to rely on. Oh, to find trouble with that little girl? That's great. Grandpa Condor has disliked her for a long time. How dare she call Grandpa Condor an idiot? I'm the divine condor, the real deal. The divine condor said angrily, as if it couldn't accept being called an idiot. All right, brother Condor, let's go. Yiguchen waved his hand. Xingzhu wants to go too. Mu Xingzhu said. Crane Beauty, wait for Grandpa Condor here, the divine condor said gently to the white crane beside it. After that, the two people and the condor left peak number 5. Not long after, Yiguchen and the others arrived at Qin Lin's residence in the outer sect. However, Yiguchen couldn't sense any trace of Qin Lin's aura. There were other disciples' residences around this courtyard. Yiguchen's eyes darkened slightly. He looked at the disciples who were sneaking glances at him and asked, Where is Qin Lin? Hearing Yiguchen's cold tone, the disciples' faces turned pale. One of them braced himself and said, Senior brother Yi, senior sister Qin was brought to the inner sect by a few disciples a few days ago. I think she went to look for senior brother Wang Shaon. Wang Shaon? Yiguchen's eyes flashed with cold light. It was obvious that Qin Lin wanted to break the bet and was unwilling to hand over the heaven-earth variant thunder. Qin Lin, do you think that I can't do anything to you just because you have the support of Wang Shaotian, the third disciple of the inner sect? Yiguchen flicked his sleeve and left with Mu Xingzhu and the divine condor. They headed straight for peak number 3, where Wang Shaotian was. Their actions undoubtedly attracted a lot of attention. Regardless of whether it was the outer sect or the inner sect disciples, the news spread quickly. Chapter 262. Yiguchen could be said to be an influential figure in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. He helped Mu Xingzhu obtain the number 1 position in the outer yard. Wan Jianlin caused the 10,000 swords chime to defeat Elder Gu Tuo with his sword skills. Furthermore, he made an oath to the inner yard ranking battle 2 months later. Any one of these deeds was enough to cause a stir, not to mention that Yiguchen was the only one who caused all of this. Therefore, Yiguchen's every move in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest would attract the attention of countless people. Seeing that Yiguchen and the others were going to cause trouble for Qin Lin and Wang Shaoyun, the surrounding disciples also quickly spread the news. Inner Yard, number 6 peak. Li Lingxiao, who was dressed in a golden robe, was practicing his sword in the bamboo forest. At this moment, a young man in a blue shirt arrived at number 6 peak. He found Li Lingxiao and said, Senior brother Li, let me tell you something. I heard that Yiguchen is going to cause trouble for Wang Shaotian. The young man in a blue shirt was naturally Ting Jingshan. Oh, Yiguchen is overestimating himself? Li Lingxiao raised his eyebrows. Wang Shaotian was ranked 3rd in the inner yard and possessed the cultivation of the 6th transformation of the divine soul realm. He was extremely powerful. Even someone as arrogant as Li Lingxiao was impressed and saw him as a strong opponent. In his eyes, Yiguchen, who couldn't even use his true qi, was not qualified to cause trouble for Wang Shaotian. But I heard that Yiguchen brought his rank 4 demonic beast with him. Ting Jingshan said, relying on the strength of his demonic beast? Ridiculous. Does he really think that Wang Xiaotian can be dealt with by a demonic beast? Let's go take a look. Li Lingxiao waved his hand and headed towards number 3 peak with Teng Jingshan. On the other side, Ji Ling, Chu Qingqi and the others had also heard the news. Ji Ling's eyes shone with curiosity. She would go wherever there was a commotion. At this moment, she was also heading towards number 3 peak. Brother Yi is really fearless. Chu Qingqi smiled bitterly and also headed towards number 3 peak. He had the best relationship with Yi Guchen, and he also knew how powerful Wang Xiaotian was. Chu Qingqi had already made up his mind. If Yi Guchen couldn't handle the situation, he would go directly to Elder Qin He. However, at this moment, amidst the surging undercurrents, number 3 peak was incomparably calm. Among the countless peaks in the inner court, besides peak number 1 where Yan Wushuang was and peak number 2 where Bai Zichen was, peak number 3 where Wang Xiaotian was the most abundant in spirit energy. As far as the eye could see, the mountain peak was clear and precipitous with spirit mist coiling around it. At the top of the mountain peak, there were numerous pavilions that were exquisite and gorgeous, and there were even lakes, tall bamboos, and fake mountains that adorned the mountain peak. In the central area of this pavilion, a young man was sitting cross-legged on a futon in a room. He wore green clothes, had a handsome face, and a steady aura. Although he looked young, his aura was extremely oppressive. Obviously, he was an existence that was usually surrounded by stars. At this moment, there was a faint smile on the young man's face as he looked at the purple-robed woman sitting beside him. This woman was Qin Lin. The green-robed man was naturally the genius who ranked 3rd in the inner court, Wang Xiaotian. Wang Xiaotian's eyes roamed over Qin Lin's body. Due to her sitting cross-legged, Qin Lin's originally delicate curves were vividly highlighted. Her plump breasts revealed a touch of snow-white, narrow waist, and perfectly round buttocks that were wrapped in a dress below. This caused a genius like Wang Xiaotian to have a hint of passion in his eyes. Putting aside her personality, Qin Lin was indeed a stunner. As if sensing Wang Xiaotian's restless gaze, Qin Lin felt awkward, but she still wore a smile on her face. At the same time, there was a trace of nervousness. Senior brother Wang, I came to you because I have no other choice. If Lin doesn't hand over the worldly variant thunder, Yi Guchen will definitely not let me go. Qin Lin said as her beautiful face revealed a tearful expression. Seeing Qin Lin's pitiful appearance, Wang Xiaotian could not suppress the passion in his heart. At the same time, he sneered and said, Yi Guchen, who is he? He's just a cripple who has lost all his genuine qi. How dare he threaten you? Senior brother Wang, don't underestimate Yi Guchen. Lin is not very clear about his strength, but he actually has a way to teach Mu Xingzu so well. Even when Lin borrowed senior brother's dragon cry sword, I still lost miserably. Qin Lin said as if she could not suppress her anger, and there was deep hatred in her eyes. There's no need to be discouraged. The reason why you lost was because your attributes were not compatible with my dragon cry sword. When there's a chance in the future, senior brother will find you a divine weapon with compatible attributes and give it to you. Wang Xiaoyan waved his hand and said, Thank you, senior brother. Qin Lin's beautiful face was radiant, but she seemed to have thought of something and said uneasily, Senior brother, Yi Guchen will definitely look for me when he finds out that I didn't hand over the worldly variant thunder on time. When that time comes, he will come to senior brother. Qin Lin wanted to say something but stopped. She did it on purpose, wanting to stir up the hatred between Wang Xiaotian and Yi Guchen. As expected, Wang Xiaotian's eyes immediately darkened. He said calmly, Lin, do you think that I'm not Yi Guchen's match? Of course Lin doesn't think so. Senior brother Wang's cultivation is exceedingly high and your strength is extraordinary. Lin is naturally at ease with you here. I'm just afraid that Yi Guchen will come and trouble senior brother to make a move. If Yi Guchen wasn't crippled, he might still be a problem to me. However, he's already a cripple now. He can't even be considered a problem. He's just trash that can be easily swept away. The others in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest praise him, But I, Wang Xiaotian, won't. Wang Xiaotian raised his head and laughed, as if he felt that it was extremely laughable. Qin Lin also wanted to laugh, but when she thought of the faint pain in her abdomen, Qin Lin couldn't laugh at all. If Yi Guqun, who sent her flying with a kick, was trash, then what was she? Trash among trash? Lin, don't worry. You can rest at ease and recuperate here. No matter how bold Yi Guqun is, he should know the gap between him and me. He definitely won't dare to come here. Wang Xiaotian smiled. Just as he was about to say something, a cold shout sounded from outside the pavilion like a bolt from the blue. Qin Lin, I'll give you 10 breaths of time. Get out here. This voice was like rolling thunder that resounded in all directions. Hearing this familiar demon-like voice, Qin Lin's delicate body instantly trembled. She seemed to recall the fear of being dominated by Yi Guqun once again. Wang Xiaotian's face immediately darkened when he heard this voice. He had just said that Qin Lin was safe and sound here, but in the next moment, someone came to find him. This was simply a slap to his face. Lin, come with me. After I've completely crippled Yi Guqun, I'll hand him over to you directly. Wang Xiaotian stood up, and the aura of the 6 transformations spread out. Qin Lin instantly felt suffocated, and at the same time, joy appeared on her face. Thinking that Wang Xiaotian could deal with Yi Guqun, Qin Lin felt a burst of joy in her heart. She followed Wang Xiaotian out of the door. At the entrance of the 3rd peak, Yi Guqun stood coldly with his hands behind his back. Mu Xingzu and the Divine Eagle were by his side. However, at this moment, there were also many figures flashing in the surroundings. Although the outer yard disciples couldn't enter the inner yard, many of them had heard the news. They all knew that there would be a good show to watch today. Chapter 263. Yi Guqun stood calmly in front of the many inner court disciples. Although he didn't want to cause trouble, Yi Guqun's heart turned cold when Qin Lin went against the bet and refused to hand over the variant thunderbolt. There was no doubt that the variant thunderbolt was important to him. Whether it was tearing the Qi Si seal or breaking through the 3rd minor tribulation, he needed the assistance of the variant thunderbolt. Yi Guqun had to become stronger as soon as possible, so he was determined to obtain the variant thunderbolt. TSK, Yi Guqun is really courageous. Wang Xiaotian's ranking is 1 place higher than mine. What method do you have to deal with him? Not far away, Ji Ling, who was dressed in a green robe, leaned lazily against a bamboo tree. Her beautiful legs were casually crossed as she looked at Yi Guqun with interest. Although Ji Ling's ranking was 1 place lower than Wang Xiaotian's, her cultivation was similar to Wang Xiaotian's. Therefore, Ji Ling was very curious as to what method Yi Guqun had to deal with Wang Xiaotian. If he could really deal with Wang Xiaotian, it meant that Yi Guqun could also deal with Ji Ling. This was also the reason why Ji Ling rushed over as soon as she heard the news. On the other side, Chu Qingqi was also watching. However, he was good friends with Yi Guqun. When he saw that Yi Guqun had provoked Wang Xiaotian, he felt a trace of anxiety in his heart. Wang Xiaotian's cultivation and strength were not comparable to Qin Lin's. Even Yan Wushuang, Bai Zichen, and the other geniuses couldn't easily suppress Wang Xiaotian. In addition, Li Lingxiao, Ting Jingshan, and the others were also present. They didn't have any intention of getting involved in this matter. They just stood outside and looked coldly at Yi Guqun with a playful smile on their faces. Yi Guqun, who was standing outside the courtyard, didn't care about the gazes of the people around him. As time passed, his eyes gradually turned cold. There's still 1 breath left. Yi Guqun's face was covered with a faint layer of frost. At the last moment, the door of the pavilion was finally pushed open, and Wang Xiaotian and Qin Lin walked out. Wang Xiaotian was dressed in a green robe and had a jade-like complexion. His expression was very casual and he didn't even look at Yi Guqun. This was a direct humiliation that was equivalent to disregard. On the other hand, Qin Lin wasn't as calm as Wang Xiaotian. Her face was slightly pale, and her beautiful eyes glanced at Yi Guqun from time to time with traces of fear in her eyes. This was because Yi Guqun gave her too much pressure. She was not Wang Xiaotian. She did not have the confidence to confront Yi Guqun. Lin, There are dogs barking here. Shall we go somewhere else to cultivate? Wang Xiaotian turned to Qin Lin with a gentle smile. When these words were spoken, it caused the surrounding Inner Academy disciples to be quietly shocked in their hearts. After all, Yiguchen had created many miracles in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. Not only that, he was also known as the Sword Sect Master of the Saint Origin Dynasty. However, Wang Xiaoyan's words actually compared Yiguchen to a dog. This wasn't just disregard and humiliation, it was simply trampling on Yiguchen's reputation. Mu Xingzu's face instantly turned red. She couldn't help but rush out, but Yiguchen stopped her with one hand. Holy shit, this brat is too arrogant. The divine eagle also grinned. Qin Lin's heart trembled when she heard Wang Xiaoyan's words. She was afraid that she would completely anger Yiguchen. She carefully glanced at Yiguchen and found that Yiguchen was still expressionless. However, this expression made Qin Lin tremble in fear. If it wasn't for the fact that the heavenly lightning was too precious, perhaps Qin Lin would really hand it over. However, this heavenly lightning was also related to her future cultivation. Therefore, even if she was known to go back on her words, Qin Lin would never hand it over. Yiguchen was neither angry nor embarrassed. Instead, he calmly asked, Qin Lin, let me ask you one more time. When will you hand over the heavenly lightning? He also didn't care about Wang Xiaotian. Ling, let's go. Wang Xiaotian placed his hands behind his back and the aura of the 6 transformations spread out. In an instant, it was like a storm had swept out, and it spread out in all directions with a bang. It caused some of the surrounding disciples with slightly lower cultivations to be unable to help but retreat repeatedly, and the gazes they shot at Wang Xiaoan carried traces of astonishment. Senior brother Wang Xiaoan is too strong. As expected of the third in the Inner Academy. Other than senior sister Yan and senior brother Bai, who else can suppress senior brother Wang? Many of the Inner Academy disciples exclaimed. Generally speaking, the top 5 geniuses of the Inner Academy rarely fought. Therefore, most of the Inner Academy disciples knew that Wang Xiaotian was strong, but they didn't know how strong he was. It wasn't until Wang Xiaotian released his aura that the crowd was shocked. At the same time, these people looked at Yiguchen with pity in their eyes. Yiguchen might have had some confidence with the help of the divine condor, a 4th-rank demonic beast. But now, everyone could see that even a 4th-rank demonic beast was no match for Wang Xiaoyan. Oh, let's see how Yiguchen embarrasses himself. Teng Jingshan sneered. Li Lingxiao also looked like she was waiting to watch a good show. Yiguchen stood in front of the pavilion and didn't have any intention of backing down. Wang Xiaoyan's face finally turned cold. He said indifferently, a good dog doesn't block the way. If you know what's good for you, I don't mind you barking here. Fuck you. Before Yiguchen could say anything, the divine eagle was furious. However, it was also very cautious as it sensed that Wang Xiaotian was extraordinary. With the divine eagle's strength, it might not be able to suppress Wang Xiaotian. Little Yi, I might not be able to defeat this bastard. Although the divine eagle released its demonic qi, it secretly transmitted its voice. It doesn't matter. Yiguchen still looked indifferent. He looked at Wang Xiaotian and said, I'll give you a chance. If you back off and don't interfere with Qin Lin's matter, I'll let this matter go. Hearing Yiguchen's words, not to mention Wang Xiaotian, even Ji Ling, Chu Qingqi, Li Lingxiao, and the others looked at him strangely. With Yiguchen's current cultivation, what gave him the confidence to say such words? Interesting. I thought that since your Zhen Qi was crippled, you should have some self-awareness. I didn't expect that even your brain was damaged. Lin, don't you think it's funny? Wang Xiaoan was so angry that he laughed and shook his head, but his eyes were getting colder. Qin Lin forced a smile, but for some reason she felt uneasy. Brother Eagle, it's time for you to show off. Yiguchen smiled faintly. The divine condor coughed. He wanted to say something but stopped on second thought. It had always bullied the weak and feared the strong. Seeing that Wang Xiaotian was tough, it hesitated for a moment. Yiguchen, you're indeed confident. Is this just a lowly divine eagle? I can kill it easily. Wang Xiaotian released his demonic qi and looked calm and confident. How dare you call me a divine eagle? How dare you insult my bloodline? Fuck you, I'm going to fuck you to death, fuck you to death. Hearing this, the divine condor's eyes turned red. Its feathers stood on end, like an enraged hedgehog. Its demonic aura surged in all directions and pounced toward Wang Xiaotian. Wang Xiaotian looked extremely calm and confident. He didn't even take out the dragon sword. He raised his hand and was about to attack the divine eagle. However, in the next moment, Yiguchen smiled faintly and said, Wang Xiaoyan, I gave you a chance, but you didn't take it. Since that's the case, don't blame me. Yiguchen waved his hand and the origin ring on his finger flashed. At the next moment, a blood-red figure flashed out and blasted a punch at Wang Xiaotian. With this punch, the air screamed, as if the earth was cracking and the mountains were collapsing. The sound of the punch filled the sky. Chapter 264. When this figure appeared, it was like a blood-red lightning bolt. No one could react in time, let alone the overconfident Wang Xiaotian. This blood-red figure surpassed the divine condor at an extremely fast speed and punched towards Wang Xiaotian's face. Not good. Wang Xiaotian's expression changed. At this moment, his calmness, his confidence, his arrogance, and his condescension had all disappeared. What he saw in his eyes was only shock and disbelief. Boom! Wang Xiaotian could indeed be called a proud son of heaven. At the last moment, the soul power in his sea of consciousness exploded, wanting to use this to block the figure for a moment, so that he could react and prepare. However, to Wang Xiaotian's surprise, the figure was not affected by the soul attack at all. In the next moment, the cold fist ruthlessly smashed onto Wang Xiaotian's handsome face. Puchi! Wang Xiaotian's entire body was like a kite with a broken string, falling back heavily. The cold fist was incomparably hard, and half of Wang Xiaotian's handsome face was almost caved in. A few teeth fell out along with blood. His body flipped in midair, and then fell to the ground with a plop. At this moment, the world was silent. The spectating disciples' eyes widened in disbelief, and their jaws almost fell to the ground. They seemed to not dare to believe everything in front of them. Wang Xiaoyan, who was still handsome and extraordinary a moment ago, was now lying on the ground with half his face bruised and swollen. His green robe was stained with dust, and he was in a sorry state. This contrast was too great, and it happened in an instant. It was incomparably shocking. Ji Ling covered her little mouth with one hand, but it was difficult to conceal the shock in her beautiful eyes. She looked at the blood-red figure and exclaimed in a low voice, "It's a puppet." The blood-red figure was as solid as steel, and it had a heavy and steady aura. It was the blood cloud puppet that Yi Guchen obtained in the Venerable One's cave. The blood cloud puppet was a puppet unique to the Baiming family, one of the 5 great families of the South Horizon region. A puppet that came from such a powerful force would definitely have extraordinary power. Yi Guchen didn't excessively stimulate the blood cloud centipede's power. This was because the demonic cloud blood crystal behind its head had a limited amount of energy. Even so, just by slightly activating it, a portion of its might would be enough to threaten Wang Xiaotian. So it's a puppet. The spectating disciples heaved a sigh of relief. But at the same time, they looked at Yi Guchen with undisguised jealousy. With such a precious puppet by his side, even if Yi Guchen's true qi was crippled, no one would dare to bully him. Damn it! How could Yi Guchen possess such a precious treasure? In the distance, Li Lingxiao and Teng Jingshan looked at the blood cloud puppet with burning eyes. At the same time, they were extremely jealous of Yi Guchen. Obviously, they believed that it was impossible for Yi Guchen to possess such a treasure. The only explanation was that the puppet came from the Venerable One's cave. When they thought about how the Venerable One's cave was occupied by a cripple like Yi Guchen, Li Lingxiao and Teng Jingshan's eyes became even colder. Chu Qingqi, on the other hand, was completely relieved. As expected, Brother Yi never does anything that he's not confident in. Chu Qingqi smiled bitterly. On the other side, Qin Lin, almost stopped breathing when she saw Wang Xiaotian being knocked down with a single punch. She looked at the blood cloud puppet with an unprecedented shock. With just a single punch, Wang Xiaotian, who was her strongest backer in her heart, was knocked down. Moreover, Wang Xiaotian was an expert in the 6 transformations of the divine soul. This. Qin Lin was about to cry. Her mouth was full of bitterness. If she had known that Ye Guqin had such a trump card, she wouldn't have done such a superfluous thing. Ye Guqin, I'm going to kill you. With a loud roar, Wang Xiaotian's aura burst out. As the third in the inner yard, Wang Xiaotian, who was the center of attention, had never been humiliated like this. Such a miserable appearance made Wang Xiaotian want to kill Ye Guqin. He wanted nothing more than to trample Ye Guqin under his feet. However, restrain him. Ye Guqin's tone was cold as he pointed with one hand. In an instant, the blood cloud puppet stomped on the ground with one foot. With a loud bang, it shot out like a bloody cannonball and landed behind Wang Xiaotian. Then, its hands and feet were like chains, directly restraining Wang Xiaotian's body. Let me go. Ye Guqin, you despicable person. Do you only know how to use this kind of method? Wang Xiaotian was about to go crazy. He boasted that he was not afraid of anyone in the inner yard except for Yan Wushuang and Bai Zichen. His status was very high. Under him, even Li Lingxiao and the other geniuses of the inner yard had to respectfully call him senior brother. Over time, Wang Xiaotian developed the mentality of being superior to others. Therefore, when Ye Guqin came to visit, he was incomparably calm and indifferent. This was because he thought that he and Ye Guqin, who had lost all his true qi, were not from the same world. However, at this moment, the situation was as if heaven and earth had been turned upside down. No matter how much true qi he released, the blood cloud puppet still tightly bound his body. The violent true qi bombarded the blood cloud puppet, but only a dull buzzing sound could be heard. Wang Xiaotian, I said that I would give you a chance to not interfere with Qin Lin's matter, but you didn't take it. So, Brother Eagle, I'll leave him to you. Don't kill him. Ye Guqin's expression was indifferent, but his eyes were cold. Ye Guqin never wanted to provoke others, but there were always people who did not know his limits. Qin Lin was like that, Gu To was like that, and now Wang Xiaotian was like that. He bastard, how dare you call me a fool? Grandpa Eagle will kill you. The divine eagle flapped its wings and stretched out its claws to grab Wang Xiaotian. Ye Guqin, don't you think it's too despicable to deal with senior brother Wang Xiaotian in such a way? At this moment, Teng Jingshan stepped out and said with disdain. Seeing Teng Jingshan step out, the surrounding people were surprised. However, some of them nodded slightly and looked at Ye Guqin with disdain. Teng Jingshan, since you said so, why don't you take Wang Xiaotian's place and suffer? Ye Guqin's eyes were cold. How could he not know what Teng Jingshan was thinking? Firstly, he wanted to smear his reputation. Secondly, he wanted to befriend Wang Xiaotian. When Teng Jingshan heard Ye Guqin's words, his expression changed. To him, not to mention the blood cloud puppet, even the divine eagle was a threat to him. Being stared at by Ye Guqin, Teng Jingshan's expression became unnatural. He gritted his teeth and retreated. Ye Guqin ignored him and turned to look at Qin Lin. Qin Lin's expression changed drastically. She quickly retreated and wanted to leave. Do you think you can leave? Ye Guqin stomped his feet on the ground and golden light burst out from his body. Countless Sanskrit words surged out as though they were accompanied by the chanting of Buddha. The invincible Vajra body was displayed. He dashed toward Qin Lin. Ye Guqin, don't force me. Qin Lin screamed and summoned her flying sword. She poured her true energy into it and slashed at Ye Guqin. However, such an attack could not threaten Ye Guqin at all. He flicked his finger and it landed on the flying sword. With a cracking sound, the divine weapon with spiritual inscriptions was broken by Ye Guqin. Then, Ye Guqin stretched out his hand and grabbed Qin Lin's slender, snow-white neck. He pulled her in front of him. Hand over the heavenly thunder. Chapter 265. Qin Lin gritted her teeth as she looked at Ye Guqin's handsome face. To be honest, Yi Guchen was handsome. His facial features were sharp and angular. Any woman who saw him would think that he was a peerlessly handsome young man. However, the face in front of Qin Lin was like a nightmare to her. The heavenly thunder is the most precious treasure of the Qin family. How could we give it to you? You killed my 2 cousins. Qin Lin gritted her teeth and stared at Yi Guchen angrily. She was like a chaste woman who would never give in to him. You were the one who made the bet, and you were the one who agreed to the heavenly thunder. Now you want to use hatred as an excuse to cover up your untrustworthiness. Qin Lin, is this how you use your intelligence? Yi Guchen's tone was playful. Qin Lin's face turned even paler when she heard this. She glanced at the inner yard disciples from the corner of her eye. Although most of them were not fond of Yi Guchen, they were not friendly to Qin Lin, who had broken her promise. Such a treacherous person would not be welcomed anywhere. Yi Guchen Qin Lin bit her lips so hard that they were about to bleed. She thought that with Wang Xiaotian as her backer, she could let this matter slide. However, she did not expect Yi Guchen to have such a precious puppet as the blood cloud puppet. In front of the blood cloud puppet, even someone as powerful as Wang Xiaotian was like a chicken or a pottery dog that could be easily crushed. Not far away, Wang Xiaotian, who was bound by the blood cloud puppet, was in a very sorry state. No matter how hard he tried, he could not cause any substantial damage to the blood cloud puppet. The divine eagle, on the other hand, could vent its anger. Of course, with Yi Guchen's warning, the divine eagle could not kill Wang Xiaotian. However, this did not stop the divine eagle from taking advantage of Wang Xiaotian. Its sharp claws were like knives. With a few slashes, the divine eagle tore half of Wang Xiaotian's clothes and left a bloody wound on his chest. Bastard, you're courting death. Wang Xiaotian's face flushed red. His extreme anger was like a flame that was about to burn his internal organs. Normally, without the blood cloud centipede, Wang Xiaotian could easily deal with the divine condor. But now, he was bound by the blood cloud centipede and was simply a fish on the chopping board, waiting to be slaughtered. Motherfucker, you still dare to curse me? The divine condor's feathers flared up again. It showed no mercy at all as it reached out with its sharp claws. In the next moment, Wang Xiaotian's expression froze as if he was stunned. He felt that his entire body was cold, so cold that it was penetrating. Ah! Not far away, some female disciples screamed and covered their eyes. Even Ji Ling's beautiful face froze in shock. Then she spat and turned her face away, her face slightly red. Wang Xiaotian was completely dumbfounded. He seemed to have forgotten how to think. Damn it, you're so arrogant. You think you're so awesome? Is that an earthworm down there? It's not even 1% the size of me. How can it bring happiness to your partner? The divine condor's mouth was very annoying. He glanced at Wang Xiaotian's lower body with a sigh and a sympathetic expression. He shook his head slightly. Wang Xiaotian's blood flowed into his brain and he was completely dumbfounded. He felt as if the blood vessels in his temples were about to explode. Ah! Wang Xiaotian's face was completely red. He was completely out of control and was about to go crazy. He was completely naked right now. It was as if he was being executed in public. Not only that, but the divine condor's vicious words also poked at his sore spot. Not far away, Li Lingxiao, Ting Jingshan, and the others were also stunned. They didn't expect Wang Xiaotian to be so weak in that aspect. Even some female disciples, although covering their eyes, peeked through the gaps of their fingers and laughed mockingly. Looking at those gazes and hearing the meaningful laughter of those female disciples, Wang Xiaotian felt as if his heart was about to explode. If God gave him a chance to start over, he would definitely not care about Qin Lin. Ah! Wang Xiaotian howled like a wounded lone wolf. Sigh. Brother, although you made Grandpa Condor very unhappy when you scolded me, as a male, Grandpa Condor still sympathizes with you. Come, let me cover you. You have to take good care of your little brother. After all, it's already so thin and small. The divine condor sighed. With sympathy and pity, he pecked at a small piece of cloth on the ground and covered the earthworm. Hearing this, Wang Xiaotian spat out a mouthful of blood and fainted from anger. Little Yi, it's over here. The divine condor flapped his wings and laughed. Hearing this, Yiguchen felt a chill run down his spine. At the same time, he thought to himself that he would never provoke the divine condor in the future. This condor was too terrifying. Yiguchen turned to Qinlin and said indifferently, "Your backer is gone. My patience is limited. Hand over the heavenly thunder." As Yiguchen spoke, he tightened his grip on Qinlin's neck. Qinlin's face instantly flushed red, but she still gritted her teeth and said, "According to the rules of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, disciples are not allowed to kill each other. You don't dare to kill me." The heavenly thunder was too precious. Qinlin naturally did not want to hand it over. Moreover, in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, she was not afraid that Yiguchen would kill her. Is that so? Then, Yiguchen's lips curled into a cold smile. His face slowly moved closer to Qinlin's delicate ear. Feeling the young man's breath so close to her, Qinlin's face flushed red and her heart raced. Although she looked seductive and unrestrained, she was actually very protective of her body. Even Wang Xiaotian had never been so close to her. This action, in the eyes of outsiders, was somewhat intimate. Not far away, Mu Xingzu pursed her lips and looked at Yiguchen with jealousy. However, it was obvious that Yiguchen did not mean that. He leaned close to Qinlin's earlobe and said coldly, "I won't kill you, but how about I let you experience what Wang Xiaotian felt?" As soon as he said that, Qinlin's mind went blank as if thousands of thunderbolts were roaring. Previously, the divine eagle had pecked her clothes and revealed her pink bra. Until now, there were still outer court disciples talking about it in private. For a woman like Qinlin, if she were to experience the same thing as Wang Xiaotian, it would be more painful than killing her. "I'll give it to you. I'll give you the heavenly thunder." Qinlin screamed and said directly. Thinking that she would be naked in front of everyone, Qinlin agreed without hesitation. "You should have a communication jade slip on you, right? Ask someone to hand over the heavenly thunder and we'll be even. However, if you do anything in the future, don't blame me for being ruthless." Yiguchen's tone was very cold. Being stared at by Yiguchen's abyss-like black eyes, Qinlin felt her mouth go dry. A feeling of extreme humiliation spread in her heart, but there was also a faint trace of a strange feeling. Her earlobes were red, fragrant sweat appeared on her body, and there seemed to be ripples in her beautiful eyes. Looking at Qinlin's strange appearance, Yiguchen was puzzled, but he did not think too much about it. In the end, Qinlin gave in and sent a message to the Qin family. Wang Xiaotian, who had fainted, was carried to another place by some disciples who knew him. As for Ji Ling, Li Lingxiao, Ting Jingshan, and the others, their gazes towards Yiguchen had changed. The result was completely different from what they had expected. However, it was obvious that today's matter would soon spread throughout the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. Chapter 266. After a whole day, Yiguchen finally saw someone from the Qin family. It was an outer yard disciple, who was also Qinlin's follower. He looked at Yiguchen with fear in his eyes and handed over a jade box. "Is the worldly thunder in it?" "Qinlin, you should know the consequences of lying to me." Yiguchen frowned and glanced at Qinlin. Qinlin felt a strange feeling in her body, as if she had been stimulated by such a threatening gaze. She blushed and bit her lips, saying, "Don't worry, it's definitely the worldly thunder." Yiguchen nodded slightly and ignored Qinlin, who was in a strange state. He picked up the jade box and checked it with his soul power. Seeing that there was no special fluctuation, he opened it slowly. In the jade box, there was a fist-sized purple crystal. Its surface was covered with small runes, which produced a small seal fluctuation. There was a ball of purple lightning in the crystal, which was surging like thunder liquid, emitting a cold and gloomy aura. Strands of purple lightning overflowed from the crystal from time to time. The jade box seemed to be engraved with a spiritual rune array, which blocked the power of the lightning. "This is the worldly thunder that my cousin Qin Aoshi sensed in an abyss with the power of the ninth heaven profound thunder. It is called the purple lightning nether thunder. This thunder exists in the abyss and is contaminated with the chi of the netherworld. If it can be refined, it will be extremely powerful. Qin Lin looked at the purple lightning nether thunder. Her eyes were filled with longing and reluctance, but she knew that this thunder no longer belonged to her. Okay. Yi Guchen nodded and put the jade box into his origin ring. He glanced at Qin Lin and said, I am not a soft-hearted person, so you'd better take care of yourself. After that, Yi Guchen ignored Qin Lin and left with the divine condor Mu Xingzu. Seeing Yi Guchen's back, Qin Lin bit her lips and her eyes were filled with anger and hatred. Because Yi Guchen had taken away the worldly thunder that belonged to her. But at the same time, a strange feeling welled up in his heart. Especially when Yi Guchen grabbed her by the neck and stared at her with his dark, cold eyes, Qin Lin actually felt a trace of pleasure. Following Yi Guchen's departure, Qin Lin sat on the ground, paralyzed and powerless. Yi Guchen. Qin Lin's face was flushed red. She clenched her jade-like hands tightly as she felt a bit of moisture. Yi Guchen and the others returned to peak number 5. The divine condor left with the white crane in satisfaction, flying together. Mu Xingzu was very considerate and did not disturb Yi Guchen. She went to the bamboo forest alone to practice her swordsmanship. Yi Guchen sat cross-legged in his residence and opened the jade box. He reached out his hand, and a layer of golden light appeared on his palm. After activating the invincible Vajra body, Yi Guchen grabbed the purple crystal with one hand. In the next moment, the purple thunder liquid in the crystal suddenly rolled and broke through the seal of the purple crystal. Streaks of lightning surged out and lashed at Yi Guchen's palm like a whip. Scorch marks instantly appeared on Yi Guchen's palm. What a powerful force! It really is a worldly thunder. Yi Guchen's eyes were filled with faint joy. Even with his invincible Vajra body, the purple thunder still left scorch marks on his palm. It was clear how powerful it was. But Yi Guchen frowned slightly, and his expression became serious. Although the purple thunder was a worldly thunder, it seemed to be weaker than Qin Aoshi's golden ninth heaven Xian thunder. Any thunder with the name Xian thunder could be considered the best among all the worldly thunder. This was also the reason why Qin Aoshi could become the favored one with the ninth heaven Xian thunder. The purple lightning nether lightning was slightly weaker than the nine heavens Xian lightning. When I broke through the second spiritual tribulation, I used the nine heavens Xian thunder. The third spiritual tribulation requires more powerful heavenly thunder. Moreover, I need to tear the seal of my Qi Si. With the strength of the purple lightning nether thunder, it may not have such power. Yi Guchen muttered. He had always been meticulous. Unless there was no other choice, Yi Guchen would not do anything unprepared. Moreover, cultivating the Nine Tribulations Heart Sutra was dangerous. Yi Guchen would not bet on it. Sigh, this is a little troublesome. Yi Guchen put away the purple thunder and frowned. According to his original plan, breaking through should not be a problem after obtaining Qin Lin's worldly thunder. However, it seemed that Yi Guchen had underestimated the situation. Just as Yi Guchen was thinking about what to do next, Chu Qingqi's voice suddenly came from outside. Brother Yi, may I disturb you? Brother Chu, please come in. Yi Guchen said. Chu Qingqi entered and smiled when he saw Yi Guchen. Brother Yi, now no one in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest dares to provoke you. After all, Wang Xiaotian, who ranked third in the inner yard, ended up in such a miserable state. He is still in a coma and has not woken up. Oh, I never want to cause trouble, but there are always people who don't know what's good for them. Yi Guchen shook his head. Well, let's not talk about this for now. I'm here to tell Brother Yi about the opening of the Void Sword Realm in a month. Chu Qingqi said seriously. Void Sword Realm? Yi Guchen raised his eyebrows slightly. He was unfamiliar with this. It is said that the Void Sword Realm is the location of a sect called the Void Sword Sect in the ancient times of the Saint Origin dynasty. After it was accidentally discovered and the news spread, it was jointly controlled by the 7 major forces and became a place of opportunity. Chu Qingqi said. Oh, it seems that there are many opportunities in the Void Sword realm. Yi Guchen said, but he was not too interested. After all, he already had a venerable cave residence. If it was not a particularly rare opportunity, Yi Guchen would not be too interested. Seeing Yi Guchen's attitude, Chu Qingqi smiled bitterly. Brother Yi, don't underestimate the Void Sword sect. In ancient times, the strength of the Void Sword sect was incomparable. Even if the 7 major forces combined, they were not necessarily stronger than the Void Sword sect. I see. Yi Guchen raised his eyelids slightly and was a little interested. Chu Qingqi stared at Yi Guchen and said with a slightly serious face, the Void Sword realm is located in a space. It is said that it was accidentally discovered by the Void Sword sect. Although the Void Sword sect has long been destroyed, the opportunities left behind still exist. That space is located in the eastern hanging mountain area. There will be a space fluctuation around the same time every year, and this time the fluctuation will be in a month. I don't know what opportunities there are in the Void Sword realm. Moreover, according to what Brother Chu said, it must not be the first time that the 7 major forces have entered the Void Sword realm. How many opportunities can be left behind? Yi Guchen said. Definitely a lot. Although it is a small space, its area is even several times larger than the swordsmanship-seeking mountain range. There are countless ruins everywhere. As for the opportunities, let me tell you. You must know Xian Hao of the Wuji Sword sect. Do you know why Xian Hao became the top god's favored son? Chu Qingqi said in a dignified tone. Is it because of the opportunities in the Void Sword realm? Yi Guchen's eyelids twitched. Yes, although Xian Hao used to be a god's favored son, he was not as famous as he is now. The reason why he is so powerful is that in the Void Sword realm, he obtained the unique inheritance of the Void Sword essence. Chu Qingqi's words were shocking. What? Yi Guchen sounded surprised. Chapter 267. Sword intent, no matter if it was comprehended by oneself or obtained an inheritance, was a rare fortuitous encounter. So far, Yi Guchen had met less than 10 people with sword intent. This included those with ordinary sword intents. In terms of the grade of peerless sword intent, apart from the mysterious Shui, the only person Yi Guchen had met who possessed a peerless sword intent was Gu Xiaoyang. His star sword intent was of the peerless grade. However, if ordinary sword intents were 1 in a million, then peerless sword intents were even rarer. Even Yi Guchen himself only possessed the peerless Azura sword intent. As for the edgeless sword intent, he had yet to comprehend it. However, Xian Hao was able to obtain the peerless void sword intent in the Void Sword realm. This was a great opportunity. As expected, only this kind of opportunity can move Brother Yi. Chu Qingqi shook his head and smiled. However, since Xian Hao has obtained the inheritance of the Void Sword intent, it means that there is no more chance. Yi Guchen also felt that it was a pity. Although he was not clear about the abilities of the Void Sword intent, it was obvious that the peerless sword intents were all extraordinary in their own ways. For example, his Azura sword intent had the Eye of Azura and the 18 levels of Azura Blood Sea. Brother Yi, don't be discouraged. Although Xian Hao obtained the Sword Will of the Void, there are still other Sword Wills in the Void Sword realm. Not only that, but other than the Sword Wills, there are also all kinds of precious medicines, divine weapons, cultivation methods, and swordsmanship. If you are lucky enough, you can obtain them all. Moreover, Chu Qingqi paused slightly and looked at Yi Guchen, seemingly hesitating. Brother Chu, please speak your mind. Yi Guchen said. Chu Qingqi looked at Yi Guchen and said, I see that Brother Yi is quite interested in the Heavenly Thunder variant. Yes, the Heavenly Thunder variant is useful to me. Yi Guchen nodded slightly and did not say anything. After all, the 9 Tribulations Heart Sutra was one of Yi Guchen's core secrets. It was second only to the Sword of Thunder Tribulation. If it was accidentally leaked, it would definitely attract a lot of threats. Although he trusted Chu Qingqi, there was no need for him to reveal everything and invite trouble for himself. Seeing this, Chu Qingqi did not care too much. After all, everyone had their own secrets. He said, I once heard from an inner yard disciple who had entered the Void Sword realm that he seemed to have found traces of the heavenly thunder in the Void Sword realm. Hearing this, Yi Guchen's dark eyes flashed with a bright light. He asked, "Brother Chu, are you serious?" "Of course. If you don't believe me, you can follow me to ask that inner yard disciple," Chu Qingqi said. Yi Guchen nodded slightly, his eyes filled with interest. Just now, he was still having a headache over the matter of the heavenly thunder. If he didn't have a stronger heavenly thunder, he was afraid that it would be difficult for him to tear the seal of his energy sea and pass the tribulation with just the purple lightning nether thunder. But now, it was as if someone had given him a pillow just when he was about to doze off. If Yi Guchen could really find a second type of heavenly thunder in the Void Sword realm, then with two types of heavenly thunder he was almost 80% sure that he could tear the seal of his energy sea and pass the tribulation. Then, Yi Guchen left with Chu Qingqi to look for that inner yard disciple. However, Chu Qingqi took Yi Guchen to the outer yard. "Brother Chu, didn't you just say that the one who found the traces of the heavenly thunder was an inner yard disciple?" Yi Guchen asked. "Indeed, but today he seems to be teaching the outer yard disciples. Most inner yard disciples have to take some time out every month to teach the outer yard disciples. Only you, who are in the top 10, have the right to be exempted from this obligation." Chu Qingqi shook his head and smiled. Yi Guchen suddenly understood and at the same time understood the value of being a disciple with a purple gold token. Whether it was status or power, they were better than ordinary inner yard disciples. No wonder Qin Lin and the others coveted his purple gold token so much. Not long after, Yi Guchen and Chu Qingqi arrived at the sword training square of the outer yard. There were hundreds of outer yard disciples practicing their swordsmanship on the square, sweating profusely. Their eyes were surging with determination, and their biggest goal was to enter the inner yard. Yi Guchen glanced around and did not see anyone teaching. Then, his eyes suddenly focused on a big tree at the edge of the square. Amidst the dense branches of the tree crown, a handsome young man was sitting with his legs crossed. He was holding a chicken drumstick that was sizzling with oil in his hand, and he was happily gnawing on it. He formed a sharp contrast with the disciples who were practicing their swordsmanship on the square. He's the one who knows about the heavenly thunder. Coincidentally, he has the same surname as you, Brother Yi. His name is Yi Xie, and he ranks 13th in the inner yard. Chu Qingqi said lightly. Yi Guchen raised his eyebrows slightly. This strength was not weak. The two of them walked under the tree. The handsome young man named Yi Xie stopped gnawing on the chicken leg and caught a glimpse of Yi Guchen from the corner of his eyes. He suddenly froze and landed on the ground with a flip. Yi Xie stared at Yi Guchen, and Yi Guchen responded indifferently. Yi Guchen was now facing a lot of discrimination and prejudice in the inner yard. Although there were a small number of inner yard disciples who supported Yi Guchen, most of them maintained an indifferent attitude towards Yi Guchen and even mocked him. Therefore, Yi Guchen did not know what Yi Xie's attitude towards him was. With a hint of curiosity in his eyes, Yi Xie said with a smile, "I'm Yi Xie. I've heard a lot about Sword Master Yi. Coincidentally, 500 years ago, we might have been from the same family." Yi Guchen also smiled and nodded. If people respected him, he would respect them tenfold. However, since Yi Xie had such an attitude, Yi Guchen was a little more confident about asking about the heavenly lightning. Chu Qingqi briefly explained the purpose of his visit. "You want to find the heavenly lightning?" Yi Xie raised his eyebrows and looked at Yi Guchen in surprise. Yi Guchen nodded. Yi Xie shook his head and said, "Sword Master Yi, you don't know how dangerous the heavenly lightning is. Although I didn't go in, I saw the rolling thunder in the sky from the periphery." "Is it in the sky?" Yi Guchen's eyes suddenly lit up. Generally speaking, the heavenly lightning in the sky was not too weak, such as Qin Aoshi's ninth heaven profound lightning. "The heavenly lightning is of great use to me. No matter how dangerous it is, I must obtain it." Yi Guchen's tone was incomparably firm. Only by tearing the seal and completing the breakthrough could his strength skyrocket and truly gain a foothold in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest instead of relying on the Blood Cloud Centipede. But at that time, I wasn't the only one who noticed the abnormality of the thunder. Yi Xie thought for a while and said slowly. Who else saw it? Yi Guchen frowned slightly. Wuji Sword Sect, Xianemo, Yi Xie said in a deep voice. Xianemo? Yi Guchen didn't know much about this person. Xianemo, like Xian Hao and Xian Ying, is also a disciple of the Sun Moon Hall. His strength is also not bad. This is not going to be easy. Chu Qingqi whispered and also frowned. The Wuji Sword Sect and the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest were like fire and water. There was almost no room for reconciliation between the two. No matter where, the disciples of the two sects would always have conflicts. Xian Mo and I discovered the abnormality of the thunder at almost the same time, but it was close to the time when the Void Sword Realm was closed, so we didn't investigate carefully. If the Void Sword Realm opens this time, Xianemo is very likely to go to that place again. Yi Xie guessed. It doesn't matter. I must obtain the heavenly lightning. No one can stop me, not even the disciples of the Sun Moon Hall. Yi Guchen's voice was cold, and his black eyes flashed with a cold light. He, Yi Jianzong's determination is really great. If you want me to bring you to the Thunder Tide, it won't be a big problem. However, I have a small condition. Yi Xie licked his lips, and his eyes revealed a trace of battle intent. Oh, what is the condition? Let's have a match. Chapter 268. Seeing that Yi Xie wanted to compete with him, Yi Guchen's eyes did not reveal too much surprise. It was very common for sword cultivators to compete with each other. Moreover, with the various miracles that Yi Guchen had created before, there were naturally many people who wanted to compete with him in the sword. Sure. Yi Guchen nodded slightly and agreed. Straightforward. The corner of Yi Xie's mouth curled up into a smile. His personality was very casual and lazy. He quickly gnawed on the drumstick and then walked onto a ring in the square. Yi Guchen also followed him onto the ring. This scene immediately attracted the attention of the outer court disciples on the square. It's senior brother Yi Xie. What is he going to do? Some outer court disciples looked over. However, when they saw Yi Guchen climb onto the ring, the doubt in their eyes instantly turned into a blazing color. Although Yi Guchen was not very popular in the inner court, in the eyes of the outer court disciples, Yi Guchen was almost deified. Because the various miracles that he had created had shocked these outer court disciples too much. At the same time, because of Mu Xingzu, these disciples were extremely eager to receive Yi Guchen's guidance. Could it be that senior brother Yi Xie wants to challenge Yi Jianzong? Senior brother Yi Xie is an expert of the fourth transformation of the Divine Soul Realm. They shouldn't be fighting with their cultivation realms. The surrounding outer court disciples were all discussing and gathered around the ring where the two were. Looking at the densely packed crowd, Yi Xie shook his head and smiled. As expected, only you, Yi Jianzong, have such an influence. How do you want to compete? Yi Guchen asked indifferently. If it's purely a competition of sword skills, even Elder Gu Tuo lost to you. I know that my level is far inferior to Elder Gu Tuo, let alone you. So I will use my cultivation, but only the cultivation of the first transformation of the Divine Soul Realm. I think Yi Jianzong can deal with it with just the strength of your body. Yi Xie smiled. Yi Guchen nodded. Alright, let's begin. Yi Xie took out a long sword from his origin ring. His temperament changed at this moment. If it could be said that Yi Xie had a gentle and lazy attitude before, then when he held the sword in his hand, the laziness and casualness in his eyes completely disappeared. Instead, it was replaced by a bone-piercing sharpness that resembled a peerless sword light. Not bad, Yi Guchen praised in his heart. A swordsman's attitude towards the sword also represented his future achievements. This Yi Xie was obviously not bad. I'm coming. Yi Xie's feet moved, and his godly soul transformation erupted. What a powerful aura! The surrounding outer court disciples all revealed astonished expressions. To these disciples in the Qi refinement realm, the cultivation of a first transformation divine soul was already like a mountain, giving them a sense of oppression. But to Yi Guchen, he didn't even fear the pressure of a heaven and earth spiritual bridge powerhouse, much less the pressure of a mere first transformation divine soul. He also took out the meteorite soft sword, and its entire body emitted a golden light. Dense ancient Sanskrit characters appeared on the surface of his body, accompanied by the Buddha's Sanskrit chant. Just by relying on the invincible Vajra body, Yi Guchen was able to compete with ordinary godly soul powerhouses. Clang! The two of them clashed, and when their swords collided, dazzling sparks burst out. This is physical strength. Yi Xie's eyes revealed a look of surprise. He had already strengthened his godly soul realm cultivation. Logically speaking, Yi Guchen, who had no true qi cultivation, should have been able to crush him. But now, Yi Xie sensed a terrifying force coming from the tip of the sword. The powerful rebounding force caused the sword to hum and tremble, and he was forced to take a few steps back. On the other hand, Yi Guchen flicked his wrist and dispelled the rebounding force. Senior brother Yi Xie was pushed back. The surrounding disciples were all stunned. Although they admired Yi Guchen very much, they also knew that Yi Guchen couldn't use true qi. But he used only the strength of his body to push back Yi Xie, who had a godly soul realm cultivation, which surprised everyone. Interesting, Master Yi Jianzong, I still underestimated you. Yi Xie gathered the true qi in his body and gathered it on the tip of his sword. In an instant, the tip of his sword surged with sharp sword light. Flowing shadow sword art, 1,000 sword stacks. Yi Xie stabbed out with his sword. As the tip of the sword vibrated, it seemed to form thousands of sword lights. They intertwined and overlapped with each other, like a sword light vortex. Such a fierce sword force caused the air to explode, and let out an ear-piercing shriek. Yi Guchen's eyes narrowed, and his black pupils seemed to be filled with blood. The Eye of Azura was activated. In the next moment, the sword lights that filled the sky gradually dissipated in Yi Guchen's eyes. In the end, only one sword was left, and it pierced towards him from the side. Yi Guchen's meteor soft sword directly collided with the sword. In an instant, the sword shadows that filled the sky disappeared, and the sound of metal vibrating resounded. This. Yi Xie's eyes were filled with extreme surprise. The flowing shadow sword art was a high-grade spiritual level sword art, and 1,000 sword stacks was its trump card. It was powerful and had a confusing effect. However, Yi Guchen's sword broke it. Again. Yi Xie once again used the ultimate move of the flowing shadow sword art, 1,000 sword shadows. In the blink of an eye, more and more sword shadows appeared one after another. They covered the sky and the earth and surged toward Yi Guchen like a tide. The incomparably complicated sword lights were dazzling, and it was impossible to distinguish the real from the fake. Even Chu Qingqi, who was watching the battle from the side, was a little dazzled. He couldn't help but admire Yi Xie's strength. This time, even if it's the sword sect of Yi, it's probably going to be troublesome. Some outer court disciples muttered softly. In their eyes, the 1,000 sword shadows were both real and fake, and it was very difficult to break through. However, Yi Guchen's lips curled into a faint smile. Perhaps for ordinary people, this move would indeed bring a lot of trouble. But for Yi Guchen, who had the brilliant sword heart and the Eye of Azura, it was still simple. Supported by the dragon elephant strength, Yi Guchen's sword slashed out, tearing the air, and directly pointed at the sword light in the 1,000 sword shadows. In an instant, a buzzing sound broke out again. The 1,000 sword shadows disappeared, and Yi Xie's eyes were filled with disbelief again. The outer court disciples were also stunned, and then their eyes revealed an even stronger look of admiration. Master Yi Jianzong, I admire you. Next, I will use my full strength and I will only use one move. Can you take it? Yi Xie spoke, and his aura skyrocketed again. The cultivation of the fourth transformation of the divine soul realm completely erupted. Nonsense! Chu Qingqi, who was below the stage, shouted in a low voice. In his eyes, Yi Guchen without true energy might be able to deal with ordinary divine soul realm experts, but the fourth transformation of the divine soul realm was definitely a bit of a stretch. The outer court disciples all took a step back when they sensed Yi Xie's sudden increase in cultivation. They sensed a pressure that made them feel suffocated. 100-sword aura. Yi Xie's sword was like 100 swords shooting out at the same time. This was different from the flowing shadow sword art. Although the flowing shadow sword art had millions of swords, only one sword was real. However, in this 100-sword aura, all the sword energy was real. Every sword energy could penetrate a martial artist under the second transformation of the divine soul realm. At this moment, the 100-sword aura, together with Yi Xie's full strength, shook people's hearts. Come. Yi Guchen's eyes were calm, and his body roared like a dragon. The meteor-soft sword bloomed with 3 bleak bloody lights. The fourth move of the god-slaying sword art, 3 paths. Although they had lost the support of their true chi, the 3 streams of sword chi blood rivers had turned into 3 streams of bloody light. However, their fierce killing intent was still extremely frightening. The 3 bloody lights collided with the 100-sword aura, and an ear-piercing buzzing sound erupted. After shattering dozens of sword aura, the 3 bloody lights also disappeared. It's over. Yi Xie sighed. In fact, he had used a trick in this battle and had used all his strength. However, just as Yi Xie was about to withdraw his sword energy, he saw Yi Guchen's playful smile. Yi Xie raised his eyebrows. In the next moment, Yi Guchen suddenly stretched out his left arm, and then a misty green light surged. Then Yi Xie was shocked to see an incomparably ferocious and powerful illusory dragon claw directly grabbing at him. This scene caught Yi Xie off guard. In a daze, he was directly caught by the dragon claw. After grabbing Yi Xie, the dragon claw directly pulled him towards Yi Guchen. Yi Guchen's meteor soft sword was placed horizontally on Yi Xie's neck. You let me win. Chapter 269. As Yi Guchen's words fell, the entire square fell into a deathly silence. These outer academy disciples had all witnessed Yi Xie's strength earlier. Not only did he unleash the powerful cultivation of the 4th transformation of the divine soul realm, but he also used the 100-sword aura. However, even then, in the end, Yi Guchen still grabbed hold of the opportunity to turn defeat into victory. This turn of events caused everyone to be extremely astounded. What was that illusory dragon claw? Could it be that Sword Sect Yi has recovered his genuine chi cultivation? Otherwise, how could he use such a move? After the silence, there was an uproar. All the outer disciples saw Yi Guchen's left arm suddenly transform into an azure dragon claw. He then released it and grabbed Yi Xie in front of him, turning the tables. Yi Xie was also in such a state because he didn't recover from the shock. But a win was a win, and a loss was a loss. Yi Xie wasn't a petty person. I lost. Yi Xie smiled bitterly and shook his head. I was the one who cheated. Yi Guchen put away his meteorite soft sword and cupped his fists. Sword Sect Yi is indeed hiding his strength. That power wasn't genuine chi, right? Yi Xie looked deeply at Yi Guchen. Yi Guchen nodded slightly and didn't say anything. Don't worry. Although I'm not a man of character, I'm a man of my word. When the Void Sword realm opens, I'll naturally take you to the Lightning Tide. But if we meet Shenemo and the others... Yi Xie paused. There's no need for you to do anything. Yi Guchen smiled. Don't worry, I, Yi Xie, am not a cold and indifferent person. Moreover, the disciples of the Sun Moon Hall are the enemies of all the disciples of the inner court of our Sword Sect's forest of pagodas. When Yi Xie spoke to this point, his tone was slightly cold. Yi Guchen wasn't surprised. After all, the two sects had been in conflict for a long time and were like fire and water. As the elite gathering place of the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, the inner yard naturally had conflicts with the Sun Moon Hall of the Limitless Sword Sect. The Heavenly Saber ranking of the Saber-conferred Monarch Palace and the Heavenly Immortal Palace of the Consonant's Divine Palace were the places where their elites resided. I'm looking forward to the trip to the Void Sword Realm, Yi Guchen murmured in his heart. When the Void Sword Realm opened, the elite disciples of the Seven Forces would all come. At that time, The battle would not be like the one in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. It would be a real battle. Moreover, Yiguchen could also use this opportunity to get in touch with the top geniuses of the Saint Origin dynasty. I wonder if Xian Hao of the Limitless Sword Sect and Gu Zun of the Sealed Saber King Palace will be there. Yiguchen thought to himself. But no matter what, Yiguchen was determined to obtain the heavenly thunder. He had a premonition that if he could obtain the exotic thunder in this trip to the Void Sword realm and successfully break through, his strength would skyrocket and he would not be weaker than Yan Wushuang, Xian Hao, Gu Zun and the others. After discussing some details with Yiguchen and Chu Qingqi, Yiguchen returned to his number 5 peak alone. There was only a month before the trip to the Void Sword realm and Yiguchen would not waste any time. Although he could not cultivate his true qi for the time being, he could cultivate his soul power. As he swallowed the spirit pills one by one, the spiritual force in Yi Guchen's mind became more and more vigorous. It was like a tidal wave. Perhaps it was because of his good foundation, but Yi Guchen felt that his soul power was not weaker than an ordinary divine soul realm expert even though he had yet to form his sea of consciousness. If he could break through to the divine soul realm, his realm would definitely not be limited to the first transformation. For the next few days, Yi Guchen was also immersed in his cultivation, forgetting himself. Night. The moonlight was cool like a pool of clear water, gilding the earth with silver. Inner court, number 1 peak. Compared to the other peaks, number 1 peak was aloof. It was the tallest peak and was also a forbidden area for all the disciples of the inner court. There was even an array outside the number 1 peak. Even the disciples of the inner court could not enter as they wished. This was because the number 1 peak was the residence of the Sword Sect's Pagoda Forest Master, Yan Changa's daughter, and also the number 1 disciple of the inner court, Yan Wushuang. At this moment, on the number 1 peak, there was a pool behind a quiet pavilion. The pool water was clear and dense with spiritual qi. It was obvious that the spiritual qi here was extremely dense and had merged into the water, turning into spiritual liquid. However, there were 2 beautiful figures bathing in the jade pond. They were 2 girls. One of the girls had delicate cheeks, black hair, and an elegant figure. If Yi Guchen was here, he would definitely recognize her. This girl was Ji Ling. At this moment, Ji Ling was holding the girl's hair and was carefully combing her long hair. Although the girl's body was soaked in the water, one could still see the girl's graceful figure through the clear pool water. She also had a stunningly exquisite face. Her long eyelashes, her starry eyes that always carried a trace of indifference, her straight nose, and her slightly pursed, rosy lips formed a jade face that made people forget to leave. Especially the girl's face, which always had indifference and arrogance, could arouse the desire to conquer in the bottom of a man's heart. However, it was obvious that there were not many men who could catch her eye. Her arrogance did not come from her identity, but because she was a girl but had a super strong cultivation talent that was not inferior to male martial artists. This girl was the number 1 disciple of the inner court, Yan Wushuang. Shuang, where did you go a while ago? Ji Ling, who was combing Yan Wushuang's hair, asked. She looked at the girl in front of her with a trace of infatuation. Cultivating. Yan Wushuang did not say much. Her tone was indifferent. Then what's your cultivation now? I can't see through it. Ji Ling pouted. It was obvious that she was used to the girl's indifference. I had a small breakthrough. Divine Soul 9 transformations, Yan Wushuang said casually. Ji Ling's beautiful eyes widened in surprise. Her eyes were filled with respect. Shuang, you're too powerful. Doesn't that mean you're only a step away from the life and death threshold? How can it be so simple? The life and death threshold is a breakthrough on the line of life and death. If there is no opportunity, I might not be able to break through in my lifetime. Yan Wushuang was not happy about her cultivation and her tone was still indifferent. Then I'm relieved. I was worried that Yi Guchen from the Sword Sect would threaten your position. Ji Ling breathed a sigh of relief and said with a smile. Sword Sect, huh? Interesting. Yan Wushuang said indifferently. She had heard a lot about Yi Guchen recently, especially when Wan Jianlin had triggered the resonance of 10,000 swords, which had surpassed her by 2 times. This made Yan Wushuang pay some attention to Yi Guchen, but that was it. Could it be that Shuang is interested in Yi Guchen? Ji Ling's words were filled with jealousy. There aren't many men who can catch my eye. Although Yi Guchen is from the sword sect, he doesn't have the qualifications. Yan Wushuang said indifferently. I knew there wasn't a man who was worthy of you. Ji Ling giggled and hugged Yan Wushuang from behind. Yan Wushuang faintly frowned. She stood up and walked to the shore. As she came out of the water, her curvaceous body was completely exposed to the air. Under the moonlight, the girl's body was as white as ivory and was suffused with a layer of jade light. The most stunning part was her pair of round and slender legs. The ratio was perfect to the extreme. From the tips of her feet to the curve of her thighs, it was dazzling. I have something to discuss with Uncle Feng. The girl's origin ring flashed. Some clothes wrapped around the girl's perfect body, and she wore a light blue armor made of ice. After wearing the armor, Yan Wushuang lost some of the gentleness of a young girl and gained some valiance. Ji Ling bit her red lips as she watched Yan Wushuang's figure disappear into the distance. Shuang is really like the stars in the sky. Even I can't get close to her. However, this is also good. No man can catch her eye. Ji Ling sighed softly. Ji Ling was one of the few people who could stay by Yan Wushuang's side. She naturally knew how stubborn and proud this girl was on the outside. No man of the same age could conquer her. Chapter 270. The Sword Sect Pagoda stood at the peak of the mountain. Under the moonlight, it exuded an ancient and mysterious aura. Feng Manlu sat alone on the edge of the veranda, holding a pot of wine as he faced the moon formed by the celestial emperor sword. Although he was blind, he looked like he was admiring the moon. Not long after, a young girl in an ice silk skirt armor arrived. Uncle Feng. Yan Wushuang's cold expression melted when she saw Feng Manlu's figure. She revealed her true nature as a young girl with a hint of anxiety. She would only show such an expression in front of someone she approved of. Shuang, your cultivation has improved again. Feng Manlu turned to Yan Wushuang. Yan Wushuang clenched her teeth as she looked at the handsome face that seemed to have experienced the vicissitudes of life under the moonlight. She said, Uncle Feng, Wushuang has already reached the 9 transformations of the divine soul. I should be able to become your successor. Feng Manlu fell silent. Yan Wushuang continued, Uncle Feng, Shuang wants to be your successor and go to the peak of the Forbidden Violet Mountain to fight Guzun on your behalf. Believe me, Shuang will definitely win. Feng Manlu sighed as he sensed the girl's stubbornness. You have fought Guzun before, but you lost. Shuang has never been weaker than anyone. I can win this time. Yan Wushuang's eyes were filled with stubbornness. She had fought Guzun before. Although it was not a life-and-death battle, Yan Wushuang was still at a disadvantage and was suppressed by Guzun. However, Yan Wushuang's cultivation had improved greatly this time and she was confident that she could defeat Guzun. Feng Manlu had a complicated expression when he heard the girl's words. He shook his head and said, Shuang, my successor has been decided. Who is it? Yan Wushuang's face turned pale as she gritted her teeth in disbelief. Yi Guchen of the Sword Sect. Feng Manlu said. Isn't his Zhen Qi crippled? If Shuang can't defeat Guzun, does that mean that Yi Guchen has the ability to do so? How could he possibly defeat Guzun? Yan Wushuang clenched her fists and pursed her lips tightly. Feng Manlu shook his head and said, Shuang, I know you want to defeat Guzun and prove your ability to me. However, the fate of the saber and sword does not lie with you. It lies with the Sword Sect. Shuang has never believed in fate. Only strength can change everything. Can fate help Yi Guchen recover his cultivation? Can fate help him defeat Guzun? It can't. Only true strength can defeat Guzun, and Shuang has that strength. Yan Wushuang was very stubborn and competitive. She couldn't accept wind-sweeping buildings' decision. Shuang, you have always been arrogant and looked down on other men. However, believe me, Yi Guchen is the best candidate. He will exceed your expectations, Feng Manlu said. Yan Wushuang stared at Feng Manlu with her beautiful eyes. Her face froze as she bit her lips and shouted, "Yi Guchen is not worthy." Feng Manlu smiled bitterly and shook his head when he heard the girl's cold and stubborn voice. He felt a headache coming on. However, she was Yan Changa's daughter and Feng Manlu also treated her as his own daughter. Feng Manlu felt helpless at this moment. The girl's eyes were firm as she said stubbornly, "Uncle Feng, Shuang, will personally witness Yi Guchen's cultivation in the inner yard ranking battle in 2 months. Moreover, Shuang will personally defeat him. I hope Uncle Feng will allow Shuang to replace Yi Guchen at the Forbidden City Summit." Yan Wushuang's beautiful face was filled with stubbornness as she spoke word by word with determination. "Since you are so confident, then so be it." Feng Manlu waved his hand. "Okay, then it's a promise. 2 months later, I will definitely defeat Yi Guchen and replace Uncle Feng." After Yan Wushuang finished speaking, she turned around and walked away with her slender legs. Sigh. Feng Manlu sighed. "Shuang, you always look down on other men. However, you cannot underestimate Yi Guchen. Although he is temporarily dormant, he is like a dragon hidden in the abyss. In the future, he will definitely soar into the sky. Even I cannot predict his future, let alone you." Feng Manlu shook his head. Only the two of them knew about the conversation that night. Time passed by. In the blink of an eye, 7 days had passed. In these 7 days, Yi Guchen had also refined the 50 spirit pills and the spirit pills he had obtained from the Divine Soul Realm's cave into his body. As he cultivated, Yi Guchen's soul force had also increased dramatically. If it was an ordinary person, they would definitely not be able to refine so many spirit pills in such a short period of time. This was because their mind would not be able to handle it. However, perhaps it was because of his perfect physical body, Yi Guchen was able to absorb the spirit pills without restraint. However, the spirit pills were considered precious pills. Even a purple gold order token disciple could only obtain 50 pills a month. Since there were no more spirit pills, Yi Guchen did not force himself to continue. He also felt that he was about to reach a bottleneck. In his mind, his soul force surged like waves. If it was an ordinary warrior, this soul force would be enough to form 2 or 3 seas of consciousness. "I'm really looking forward to it. If I break through to the Divine Soul Realm, what kind of power will I obtain? What will the next tribulation be?" Yi Guchen's eyes were filled with anticipation. He already had the heart of a powerhouse. Naturally, he desired to increase his strength. After a few days of closed cultivation, Yi Guchen walked out of his residence. The sky was filled with stars and the moonlight was like water. It was already night. Yi Guchen casually strolled and finally arrived at One Sword Cliff. Looking at the sword mark on the cliff that even time could not erase, Yi Guchen took out an epiphany leaf and placed it in his mouth. Yi Guchen guessed that the origin of this sword mark was the 8th generation sword Sex E Tianxing. If it was an ordinary inner court disciple, they might not be able to comprehend this sword mark. However, Yi Guchen was different. He already had the talent of a sword demon. With the help of the enlightened sword heart and the epiphany leaf, he was able to comprehend this sword mark. At this moment, Yi Guchen's comprehension had almost reached the peak. It could be said that if Yi Guchen was given a spiritual level sword technique, he would only need 10 days to reach the small success stage and a month to reach the greater success stage. Of course, this still required the support of One Sword Cliff's abstruse concept. Subsequently, Yi Guchen took out the meteor soft sword and began to practice. Perhaps because there was no genuine qi, Yi Guchen's swordsmanship returned to its original nature. With the comprehension of One Sword Cliff's sword mark, Yi Guchen's understanding became more and more. First, he used the Boundless Heaven sword art. The sword edges overlapped, and the wheel of Boundless Heaven was displayed. Then his swordsmanship improved again. The sword edge seemed to cut through the trajectory of the boundless world. Countless trajectories intertwined, forming a sword net that was completely inescapable. The ultimate move of the Boundless Heaven sword art, inescapable net. Yi Guchen had been meditating for a long time. Finally, he mastered the boundless heaven sword art and comprehended the ultimate move of the spiritual level sword art. If this move was supported by genuine chi, it would be extremely difficult for an expert in the fifth transformation of the divine soul realm to deal with it. After that, Yiguchen performed the swordsmanship he practiced again. Unsurprisingly, the Taiji swordsmanship was smoothly practiced to the advanced level. It could reflect 100% of the enemy's attack. It was almost watertight. As for the void sword technique, Yiguchen had already practiced it to the advanced level. At this moment, he improved again and directly stepped into the realm of perfect fusion. Stepping into the realm of perfect fusion, the power of the void sword technique would be multiplied. Then, the shadow kill swordsmanship had also been practiced to the advanced level. At this moment, he also stepped into the realm of perfect fusion. There was also the god-slaying swordsmanship. After the fourth move, 3 roads, Yiguchen finally practiced the fifth move. As for the last move, Yiguchen still needed some time to practice and find an opportunity. In the end, except for some scattered swordsmanship, Yiguchen only had 1 swordsmanship left. It was also Yiguchen's biggest trump card and reliance. Supreme Swordsmanship, 10,000 Deities Tribulation. Just as Yiguchen was about to practice the 10,000 Deities Tribulation, a thought suddenly flashed through his mind. I wonder if the grade of the 10,000 Deities Tribulation can leave a sword mark on one sword cliff? Yiguchen's eyes suddenly blazed. Chapter 271. One Sword Cliff was one of the 3 great places of opportunity in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. It was also the most mysterious. Due to the existence of the ancient sword mark on the precipice, no one else was able to leave a sword mark on it. Even Yen Chang'e and Feng Manlu, who were experts in the way of the sword, could not leave any sword mark on it. It was as if the ancient sword mark was a king with an inviolable majesty. No other sword technique was qualified to leave a mark on it. That was why Yiguchen was curious. He wondered if the mysterious and powerful 10,000 God Tribulation could leave a sword mark on one sword cliff. Yiguchen's eyes lit up as he began to display it. Although he didn't have the support of his true chi, the 10,000 God Tribulation's terrifying intent of destroying everything still spread out like a tide, clashing with the abstruse intent of this place. If this scene was seen by others, they would definitely be shocked. This was because the abstruse intent of this place was almost impossible to disturb. This was a sword intent that seemed to have existed since ancient times. However, when Yiguchen displayed the 10,000 God Tribulation, the terrifying destructive intent of the sword rushed out in all directions. The first move of the 10,000 God Tribulation, destruction of heaven and earth. Yiguchen's sword whistled and the air rapidly compressed as if the power of thousands of sword chi had gathered at one point. Yiguchen could already display the first move of the 10,000 God Tribulation perfectly. However, because he didn't have the support of his true chi, Yiguchen couldn't manifest the sword wings on his back, so he couldn't display 10 to 20% of its power. Even so, with the current power of the destruction of heaven and earth, ordinary experts of the first or second transformation of the divine soul realm would be pierced through and die. Boom! Around one sword cliff, there was a small tremor, causing rocks to roll down. Yiguchen looked over and saw that there was still only one sword mark on one sword cliff. Can't I? Yiguchen frowned slightly. However, if others were to find out that the swordsmanship he used was capable of shaking the one sword cliff, it would be extremely shocking. Even experts like Feng Manlu and Yen Chang'e could only cause one sword cliff to tremble at most. But one had to know that this was only 1/10 or 2/10 of the 10,000 deities' tribulation's power. Then let's go again. Yiguchen wasn't discouraged. He was about to use the second move of the myriad god tribulation, life fall. Yiguchen had once used this move in his battle with Gu Xiaoyang. However, with Yiguchen's current strength, he was still unable to unleash its full power. Even so, the incomplete life fall was still more powerful than world annihilation. Yiguchen once again attacked with his sword. Even without true chi, The power of this sword strike was still shocking. An incomparably tragic intent realm spread out with a bang. It was as if billions of living beings were lying on the ground, and the ground was covered in blood. Just this horrifying concept of slaughter was enough to make one tremble in fear. The surrounding mysterious sword concept began to boil like boiling water. Rumble. The one-sword cliff shook even more violently, and rocks kept rolling down. Yiguchen glanced over and was surprised to find something. That ancient sword mark seemed to be trembling slowly, faintly glowing. It was as if this sword strike was a threat to its position. However, in the end, the tremors subsided. Yiguchen still didn't leave a mark on the one-sword cliff. Yiguchen wasn't surprised by this. Even Feng Manlu and the others couldn't leave a sword mark on it. Not to mention Yiguchen, who didn't even have true qi. If anyone saw him being able to shake the one-sword cliff, they would be incomparably shocked. However, Yiguchen wasn't too concerned about this result. He vaguely guessed that perhaps he hadn't fully unleashed the power of the myriad god tribulation. How could the supreme sword technique recorded in the mysterious sword of thunder calamity be ordinary? Yiguchen shook his head. Just as he was about to leave, he suddenly stopped in his tracks. He suddenly remembered that he seemed to have a sword move that he hadn't practiced yet. This sword move was the sword move that Yiguchen created in this world, Pathos of Heaven. There was only one move in the Pathos of Heaven, but it was a sword technique that Yiguchen had refined from his deepest feelings and feelings. Yiguchen himself couldn't accurately grade this sword move. After all, this sword move was only one move, and it couldn't even be considered a complete set of sword moves. But no matter what, Yiguchen still decided to practice it again. He slowly closed his eyes, and the epiphany leaf in his mouth had already melted. At this moment, his mind was extremely clear, like the bright moon in the sky. In his mind, a beautiful voice and smile vaguely appeared. She was happy when she met him. She was sad when she learned that her family had been destroyed. She was heartbroken when she learned that he was the killer who killed her family. That beautiful face with tears on it made Yiguchen's heart tighten at this moment. Although Yiguchen, don't regret it, I have let you down in my life, Yiguchen let out a sigh. The sword in his hand struck again. This time, it was very slow and gentle. It was like a lover's hand caressing his cheek. But at the same time, a sorrowful yet beautiful sword concept suddenly spread out. Along with the soul power in Yiguchen's mind surging and tumbling. For a moment, Yiguchen himself didn't notice that his soul power had soared again in this sword move, reaching a terrifying level. However, right when the sword light emitted by this gentle sword strike landed on the precipice, a sharp glint appeared on the precipice. Instead, he quietly left a sword mark on the ground. At this moment, there was silence. Then, like a volcano that had been accumulating for a long time suddenly erupted, the entire one-sword cliff instantly produced an earth-shattering tremor. This tremor spread out of one-sword cliff and out of the inner courtyard. In the end, the silence of the entire swordsmanship-seeking mountain range was broken. At this moment, the sound of sword whistling filled the sky. A terrifying sword light soared into the sky from one-sword cliff as if it wanted to slash into the 9 heavens. It collided with the moon formed by the immemorial sword Celestial Emperor. And at the same time, 3 sword lights burst out from the sword mark on one-sword cliff, directly rushing towards Yiguchen. Yiguchen's eyes were filled with surprise, unable to dodge. Because the 3 sword lights were too fast, too strong, too fierce. There was no way to dodge at all. The 3 sword lights directly escaped into Yiguchen's body, and at the same time, in Yiguchen's mind, there was a vicissitude and familiar voice. The junior sequence has passed the test to become the elite sequence. The reward for the test is the 3 sword lights that I have bestowed upon you. A sword light to help you when you are breaking through. A sword light to help you when you are risking your life. A sword light to help you when you are on the brink of life and death. Become the elite sequence. Do not disgrace the name of the sword sect. Remember, these words sounded in Yiguchen's mind. Yiguchen was not unfamiliar with this voice. It was the voice of the 8th generation sword sect master, Tianxing. Elite sequence, what does that mean? Yiguchen was puzzled. At this moment, the back of his hand near the web between his thumb and index finger suddenly felt a burning sensation. Then, the green sword-shaped emblem that represented the 9th generation sword sect master appeared. And this green emblem suddenly emitted a golden light, incomparably dazzling in the dark night, like a golden star. "Oh no, let's leave first." Yiguchen's eyelids twitched. He did not want the matter of the 9th generation sword sect master to become an uproar. It was a disaster and not a blessing for him. Yiguchen's hand covered the sword-shaped emblem that emitted a golden light, and his figure flashed, directly leaving One Sword Cliff. However, One Sword Cliff still didn't stop trembling, and it seemed as if it was boiling instead and became even more intense. The entire Sword Whisper Mountain range seemed to have been illuminated by that sword light from before. What is it? Why is it trembling? What is that? That sword light is so dazzling. Who released it? It came from One Sword Cliff. What exactly happened there? In the entire forest of sword sect pagodas, no matter if they were resting, in closed-door cultivation, or meditating, all of them were alarmed. At this moment, the entire forest of sword sect pagodas was in an uproar. Chapter 272. Swish. A white-clothed figure flashed to One Sword Cliff at an extremely fast speed. His figure floated down like a white crane. He had a handsome appearance and an extraordinary bearing. It was Baizichen who was ranked second in the inner court. He had been meditating on a mountain near One Sword Cliff. After hearing the abnormal tremors, he immediately stood up and was the first to come here. His eyes that were as black as an abyss swept One Sword Cliff and frowned slightly, because he sensed that the profound sword concept in this place seemed to have suffered some sort of impact and was disrupted. However, when he approached One Sword Cliff, he sensed a concept that didn't belong to this place. That concept was filled with poignant beauty, sorrow, love, hate, and so on and so forth. This is, when Baizichen's gaze fell on One Sword Cliff, his pupils suddenly constricted. At this moment, even Baizichen, who had always had a calm and composed demeanor, was breathing rapidly as an expression of disbelief appeared in his eyes. His expression that changed rapidly was extremely interesting. Obviously, Baizichen was greatly shocked. How is this possible? Who is it? Baizichen stared fixedly at a slightly thin sword mark beside the simple sword mark. That sword mark didn't show any destructive power, nor did it have a fierce aura. However, it had clearly left behind a mark. A fortuitous encounter. This is a great fortuitous encounter. If I can comprehend it. Baizichen forcefully suppressed the shock and joy in his heart. Obviously, the abnormal tremors of One Sword Cliff just now came from this sword mark. Although he didn't know which senior in the sword Dao had left it behind, it was absolutely a great fortuitous encounter for him. Without the slightest hesitation, Baizichen took out his sword and imitated the other sword mark on One Sword Cliff. He gestured awkwardly in an attempt to comprehend the concept when he drew his sword. However, he wasn't Yiguchen and didn't have such an experience that was carved into his bones. His actions were no different from imitating a cat to draw a tiger, imitating a handyman. As the tremors of One Sword Cliff spread throughout the entire Sword Sect Pagoda forest, the sound of wind being torn apart resounded in midair. One Sword Cliff, it's from One Sword Cliff. Let's go take a look. Something must have happened. Could it be that something happened to that sword mark? Could it be that someone left a sword mark on One Sword Cliff? Don't joke around. Even Lord Feng, sect leader Yen and the First Elder were unable to leave a sword mark on it. Is there anyone stronger than them in my sword sect pagoda forest? That's true. As more and more figures arrived, more and more people began to gather around One Sword Cliff. Why do I feel that the sword concept here seems to have changed? It gives off a very sad feeling. I feel it too. I don't know why, but it makes me want to cry, said an inner yard disciple. Suddenly, an inner domain disciple discovered Baizichen's figure. That's senior brother Baizichen. He's practicing the sword? Impossible. Absolutely impossible. Am I seeing things? Look at that single sword cliff. Amongst the gathered inner court disciples, one of them looked as if he had seen a ghost as he stared at the sword mark on the solitary sword cliff. He rubbed his eyes and looked again. It's 2 sword marks. Senior brother Baizichin left a sword mark on one sword cliff. The inner court disciple cried out in disbelief. The gazes of all the inner court disciples converged on one sword cliff. Their bodies froze in an instant, as if they had been immobilized by a spell. At the same time, their minds rumbled and their minds shook. All of them opened their mouths wide and were dumbstruck. Senior brother Baizichin was actually able to leave a mark on one sword cliff. It's unprecedented. An inner court disciple spoke with a trembling voice. On the other hand, Baizichin, who was originally comprehending the concept of the sword mark, recovered from his shock. After that, he saw that there were 20 to 30 inner court disciples in the surroundings. All of them had gazes of respect and disbelief as they stared at him. Besides that, there were even more figures, including some elders, who had come after hearing the news. Because the commotion caused by the solitary sword cliff on this night was too great. Baizichin was just about to explain. An inner court disciple's eyes were filled with fervor as he said, "Senior brother Baizichin, you're actually able to leave a mark on one sword cliff. This is something that even the sect master and the others can't do. Senior brother Baizichin is worthy of being the second in the inner court." What second? Senior brother Baizichin's strength and talent aren't much weaker than senior sister Yan Wushuang. More and more people gathered in the surroundings. In the end, even Li Lingxiao, Ting Jingshan, and the others arrived. When they heard that Baizichin had left a mark on one sword cliff, all of them were shocked. If it was someone else, even if they were seen, they might not be so certain. However, Baizichin was different. Just like Yan Wushuang, he had always been cultivating in seclusion and seemed very mysterious. Moreover, his strength and cultivation were extraordinary, and his reputation in the inner court wasn't much weaker than Yan Wushuang's. There were even rumors that if Baizichin was willing, he had the strength to fight for the first in the inner court. Coupled with Baizichin's extraordinary aura and the fact that he just so happened to be swinging his sword here, it was very difficult for others not to feel that he was the one who left the sword mark. It was just like the poignant and sorrowful sword concept was very similar to Baizichin's indifferent and mysterious aura. So many people were looking at him with gazes of burning adoration. Even if it was Baizichin who'd always been indifferent, it was impossible for waves to not arise in his heart. He opened his mouth, yet the words hadn't left his mouth when it turned into silence. In the eyes of all the inner court disciples, this silence was obviously tacit agreement. Swish! Another 2 flowing lights flashed over from nearby. Under the glow of the moon, 2 beautiful young women were like celestial maidens in the mortal world, and they drew the gazes of everyone. One of them was a beautiful young woman in green clothes. The other was a beautiful young woman in a dress made of ice and had a pair of shockingly round and long legs. Shockingly, it was Ji Ling and Yan Wushuang. It's senior sister Ji Ling and senior sister Yan Wushuang. Senior sister Yan Wushuang, I've finally seen what she looks like. She's actually so beautiful. Even if it was amongst the inner court disciples, there were still some that hadn't seen Yan Wushuang. At this moment, when they saw her, they were instantly shocked by her beauty, and a wisp of shock surged into their eyes. Baizichin gazed at Yan Wushuang while a trace of hidden adoration flashed in the depths of his eyes. Yan Wushuang's beautiful eyes were fixed on one sword cliff. When she saw the sword mark, her delicate and beautiful face that had always been indifferent changed slightly, and a look of disbelief flashed in her jet-black eyes. Baizichin, did you leave that sword mark behind? Yan Wushuang's tone was slightly bitter. In the inner court, even Wang Xiaotian, who was ranked 3rd, wasn't a match for Yan Wushuang. Baizichin was the only one who had the strength to compete with her. Therefore, Yan Wushuang subconsciously thought that the sword mark was left behind by Baizichin. It wasn't that she hadn't thought of other people, but no matter how she thought about it in the inner court, she couldn't find a more suitable candidate than Baizichin. As for Yi Guchen, a person whose vital energy had been crippled, he had never appeared in Yan Wushuang's mind at all. It was as if Yi Guchen didn't exist in the inner court. Bai Zichen pursed his somewhat dry lips, and he forcefully suppressed the passion hidden deep in his eyes. It was the first time he saw such a surprised expression on Yan Wushuang's face. Therefore, he couldn't speak the truth anymore. However, Bai Zichen didn't admit it either. He only turned his back to One Sword Cliff and fell into deep thought as he looked at the sword mark. He didn't personally admit that he had left the sword mark behind. However, this action undoubtedly silently indicated that he was the one who had left the sword mark behind. This sword concept. Yan Wushuang slowly closed her beautiful eyes. Her mind seemed to have conjured up a beautiful love story. The bitterness in the young swordsman's heart, and the struggle in the face of the sword and love. He didn't want to go against his sword heart. However, he also didn't want to let down that infatuated woman. In the end, he still let her down. After closing her eyes and savoring it for a long time, Yan Wushuang opened her beautiful eyes. A teardrop fell from the corner of her eye. It was hard to imagine that although Yan Wushuang was a woman, she had a cold and indifferent personality and almost never shed tears. However, at this moment, tears really fell from her eyes. When she wiped them with her jade-like hands, she still seemed to find it unbelievable. It wasn't just Yan Wushuang, even Ji Ling and some sensitive female disciples were affected by this sword concept, and they couldn't help but shed tears. This sword strike is so sorrowful, so senior brother Bai Zichen is usually calm and silent, but his heart is suffering so much? Exactly what kind of past did he have? At this moment, all the female disciples in the inner court looked at Bai Zichen as if they were looking at the God in their hearts. They wished that they could sacrifice themselves to protect his sorrowful heart. Even Yan Wushuang's expression carried a trace of emotion. She admitted that she was moved by this sword strike. Chapter 273. The night in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest was destined to not be peaceful. In the end, not only were the inner court disciples alarmed, but even Qing He, Gu Tuo, Shi Yun, and the other inner court elders came to One Sword Cliff. When they saw the second sword mark on One Sword Cliff, they were no less shocked than the inner court disciples. When they heard that the sword mark was left by Bai Zichen, their eyes lit up. It was as if they had discovered a treasure. Some elders were even curious and wanted to ask about the details. However, Bai Zichen's expression remained calm and he remained silent. If it was any other time, it would be disrespectful to face an elder with such an attitude. However, at this moment, everyone thought that the sword mark was left by Bai Zichen. Even the elders had no complaints. Gu Tuo waved his hand and shouted, "Everyone, please disperse. Don't disturb your first senior brother from comprehending the sword. How can Bai Zichen comprehend in peace with so many people here?" Bai Zichen was a member of the First Elders faction. As an elder of the First Elders faction, he naturally had to protect his own disciple. Even Lord Feng couldn't leave a sword mark on One Sword Cliff. Could it be left by Bai Zichen? Although Elder Qing he was surprised, he was also suspicious. But are you jealous of a genius? One Sword Cliff looks at opportunities and comprehension, not just strength. Gu Tuo's words carried a hint of sarcasm. His tone changed with a hint of mockery as he said, "Or do you think that Bai Zichen isn't qualified to leave a sword mark on One Sword Cliff and that Yi Guchen, who has lost all his true energy, can leave a sword mark?" Gu Tuo sneered when he said that. He wasn't the only one who laughed. Even some of the inner court disciples who disliked Yi Guchen mocked him. If Yi Guchen, who has lost all his true energy, can leave a sword mark, then so can I. Teng Jingshan sneered in the crowd. "Ha, senior brother Teng is right." Some of the inner court disciples laughed in agreement. Some of the inner academy disciples were fearless. The various miracles that Yi Guchen had created caused them to feel great pressure. At this moment, the miracle that Bai Zichen had created had also caused Yi Guchen's reputation to be greatly diluted. Humph, this old man never said that Yi Guchen could leave a sword scar. Elder Qin he waved his sleeves angrily. Although he thought highly of Yiguchen, he did not think that Yiguchen could leave a mark on one-sword cliff. At this moment, Bai Zichen, who was in the middle of the crowd's discussion, appeared calm on the surface. However, there was a trace of unease in his heart. Who was it? Which senior left this sword scar? However, he probably won't blame me. After all, I didn't personally admit that I left it behind. Everything is just a misunderstanding between them. As long as I can get Yan Wushuang's favor, this risk is worth it. Bai Zichen was struggling in his heart. He gritted his teeth and turned to look at Yan Wushuang. Yan Wushuang's expression changed slightly. When her beautiful eyes looked at him, the usual indifference and alienation seemed to have lessened a little. Instead, it was replaced by curiosity. One had to know that Yan Wushuang was extremely proud. Other than her father, Yan Changge, and Feng Manlu, there was almost no other man who could make her expression so rich. Bai Zichen suppressed the excitement in his heart. He felt that this risk was worth it. Yan Wushuang walked over with her fair, round, and beautiful legs. She looked at Bai Zichen with a slightly complicated gaze. Bai Zichen, I originally thought that your strength was only enough to challenge me. However, this sword strike made me understand that your strength is enough to threaten me. I look forward to fighting with you in the inner yard ranking battle. Yan Wushuang's beautiful face lost a trace of indifference. After she finished speaking, the corners of her mouth curled up into an extremely faint arc. However, it was this faint smile that completely made Bai Zichen lose his mind. Such a gentle tone and such a smile could only be experienced by those who had obtained Yan Wushuang's approval. Yan Wushuang's special attitude towards him was all because of that poignant sword scar. Yan Wushuang drifted away. Bai Zichen's expression was still a little dazed. A trace of infatuation appeared in his eyes. After that, under Gu Tuo's driving, the elders and inner yard disciples finally dispersed amidst discussions. However, it was very obvious that the matter of one-sword cliff would continue for a very long time. In less than a day, the entire sword sect tower forest would know of Bai Zichen's miracle of leaving a scar on one-sword cliff. However, at this moment, the person who had truly left a sword scar on one-sword cliff and created a miracle was hiding in his residence on peak number 5 and sizing up the sequence emblem on the back of his hand. The green sword-shaped emblem had unknowingly turned gold. It was as if it was gilded. I never expected one-sword cliff to be a test left behind by Yi Tianxing. However, what does the elite sequence mean? What's the special meaning of this golden emblem? Yiguchen was very puzzled. He could not figure out the grand scheme of the sword sect and the 8th generation sword master, Yi Tianxing. After an hour, the golden sword-shaped emblem finally dissipated its light and hid under his skin. My strength has not reached that level yet. I'll put this matter aside for now. I've gained a lot from one-sword cliff this time. Yiguchen's eyes flashed with joy. Not only had his various sword skills improved, but his sword skills had also improved. More surprisingly, he had left a scar on one-sword cliff with the pathos of heaven. Putting aside the so-called elite sequence, just the 3 sword lights that Yi Tianxing had given him were a great harvest. However, Yiguchen did not find any trace of the 3 sword lights after looking into his body. However, he was certain that the 3 sword lights would be of great use at a critical moment after entering his body. Not only that, but there was also an unexpected surprise. Yiguchen discovered that his already vigorous soul power had once again skyrocketed to a terrifying level. Yiguchen tried to figure it out. Perhaps it was because the pathos of heaven technique required the coordination of soul power to emit that desolate sword concept in order to unleash its greatest power. All in all, Yiguchen's foundation had risen again. If he broke through to the divine soul realm, his strength would increase exponentially. In the following period of time, the entire sword sect pagoda forest was constantly discussing the matter of Bai Zichen leaving a scar on one-sword cliff. However, regardless of whether it was the outer yard or the inner yard disciples, they all used a respectful tone to talk about Bai Zichen. As for Yiguchen, he had been cultivating by himself in his residence to harmonize his surging soul power. Therefore, among the disciples of the sword sect pagoda forest, The number of people who talked about Yi Guchen gradually decreased. Bai Zichen replaced Yi Guchen and became the role model in the hearts of some people. Of course, Yi Guchen's influence could not be worn down in a short period of time. However, compared to before, Yi Guchen's reputation had been suppressed by Bai Zichen by a lot. However, Yi Guchen did not care about all of this. What he cared about was only his sword and his own strength. He did not care about the rest of the empty reputation. Moreover, due to his closed-door cultivation, Yi Guchen did not know about the storm outside. As time passed, the date of the opening of the Void Sword Realm was finally approaching. Chapter 274. On this day, Yi Guchen, who was sitting cross-legged in his residence, slowly opened his eyes. After a night of cultivation, he didn't look tired at all. Instead, he was in high spirits. His black eyes were as bright as the stars. Obviously, the surge of soul power made Yi Guchen's spirit much better. His foundation for breaking through to the divine soul realm was also stronger. It's time. Yi Guchen slowly got up. Today was the day to go to the Void Sword Realm. And Yi Guchen's only hope of tearing the seal of his Qi and breaking through to the next realm existed in the Void Sword Realm. If I succeed, the wind and clouds will transform into a dragon. If I fail, I will fall forever. Yi Guchen's eyes were firm and tenacious. He had the heart of an expert and didn't think that he would fail. What he needed was only opportunity and time. Yi Guchen opened the door and saw a beautiful figure dressed in green standing outside. She seemed to have been waiting for Yi Guchen. It was Mu Xingzu. "Senior brother Yi, you finally came out." Mu Xingzu said, but her eyes were a little erratic, as if she was thinking about something. "Should I tell senior brother Yi the news that senior brother Bai Zichen left a mark on One Sword Cliff? Will he feel hurt?" Mu Xingzu thought to herself. She thought a lot because Yi Guchen had created many miracles after entering the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. In Mu Xingzu's mind, Bai Zichen left a mark on One Sword Cliff, which undoubtedly broke Yi Guchen's miracles. Therefore, she was very hesitant and didn't know whether to tell Yi Guchen the news. "What's wrong with you?" Yi Guchen asked when he saw Mu Xingzu's erratic expression. "No, nothing." Mu Xingzu waved her hand. "So I better not tell senior brother Yi. If senior brother Yi could use his Jin Qi, he would definitely be able to leave a mark on One Sword Cliff." Mu Xingzu thought. Then Yi Guchen sent a message to the Divine Condor. Soon, the Divine Condor flapped its wings and flew over. "Brother Condor, you've been in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest for so long. Why don't you go out and relax?" Yi Guchen said with a faint smile. "Quack quack, that's good. Grandpa Condor is tired of staying here. I want to go out and have some fun," the Divine Condor quacked. 2 people and 1 eagle left the number 5 peak. Although there were many opportunities in the Void Sword Realm, there were also many dangers. Therefore, generally speaking, only the elite disciples of the 7 great powers had the qualifications to go there. At this moment, on a square in the inner court, there was a flying boat that could accommodate more than 100 people. The body of the flying boat was faintly glowing with the light of countless spirit inscription formations. This flying boat could also be considered as a mystical rune divine weapon, but it was used for transportation. Moreover, it was extremely expensive to make. Even with the foundation of the 7 great powers, each of them only had 1 or 2 flying boats like this. On the square, there was a dense crowd gathered. They were all the disciples and elders of the inner court. Li Lingxiao, Ting Jingshan, Yuan Mie and other elite disciples of the inner court had been waiting here for a long time. In addition, Wang Xiaotian had also arrived. Ever since that tragic incident, Wang Xiaotian had been recuperating in seclusion. Every time he thought of that kind of humiliation, Wang Xiaotian wanted to roar to the sky and tear Yi Guchen and the Divine Condor apart. Especially now, there were some hidden and playful gazes around him, glancing at him from time to time. This caused Wang Xiaotian's heart to be filled with grief and anger. However, Wang Xiaotian was very afraid of Yi Guchen's blood cloud puppet, so he suppressed the murderous intent in his heart. "Yi Guchen, If I seize the opportunity in the Void Sword realm this time, I'll make your death a luxury. Wang Xiaotian's expression was cold and ruthless. Although there were many opportunities in the Void Sword realm, there were also dangers everywhere. What Wang Xiaotian was waiting for was the moment when Yi Guqin was in danger. Suddenly, an otherworldly figure in white arrived. His temperament was calm, indifferent, and unhurried. It's senior brother Bai Zichen. Senior brother Bai Zichen is here. Bai Zichen's arrival caused an uproar in the inner court. The news of One Sword Cliff had spread like wildfire in the inner and outer courts these days. Surrounded by many respectful gazes, even with Bai Zichen's indifferent temperament, he could not help but reveal a faint smile. Bai Zichen, this time in the Void Sword realm, you have to do your best, look for opportunities, and strive to go further. You have to defeat Yan Wushuang and win first place in the inner court. You have to fight for the first elder. Gu Tuo stepped forward and whispered to Bai Zichen. Elder, don't worry. Of course. Bai Zichen nodded with a faint smile. He also understood that if he wanted to conquer Yan Wushuang, it was not enough to rely on the reputation of leaving a scar on One Sword Cliff. He had to truly defeat Yan Wushuang in order to conquer her heart. The senior who left a scar on One Sword Cliff has a profound understanding of the sword. Even with my talent, I can only comprehend 10 to 20%. But it doesn't matter. As long as I can comprehend 30% of that sword's scar, I have the confidence to defeat Yan Wushuang and completely win her heart. Bai Zichen said firmly in his heart. The two senior sisters are here. At this moment, another exclamation sounded. Not far away, Ji Ling and Yan Wushuang flew over. Ji Ling was already eye-catching enough. Her beauty was brilliant, but beside Yan Wushuang, she was willing to be a green leaf to set off Yan Wushuang. Many inner court disciples looked at Yan Wushuang with uncontrollable surprise and longing in their eyes. When a beautiful appearance and powerful strength were combined into one, such a woman was the most attractive to men and the most desirable to conquer. However, many inner court disciples also knew that Yan Wushuang was a star that they would never be able to touch in their lifetime. Shuang, are you really not going to the Void Sword realm? Ji Ling held Yan Wushuang's hand and said in a disappointed tone, I have already been to the Void Sword realm twice. It is useless to go again. What I need now is a breakthrough on the line between life and death. Yan Wushuang said indifferently, All right then. Ji Ling curled her lips. Yan Wushuang's eyes turned and fell on Bai Zichen. Bai Zichen's heart suddenly jumped, but he did not show it on his face. I am looking forward to seeing what kind of strength you will have when you return this time. I hope you will not disappoint me. Although Yan Wushuang's tone was also very indifferent, it was obvious that she looked at him in a new light. This scene caused jealousy to erupt in the hearts of many inner academy disciples. However, they also knew that Bai Zichen had moved Yan Wushuang because of the sword scar on One Sword Cliff. It seems that senior sister Yan Wushuang is senior brother Bai Zichen's. Some inner court disciples sighed in their hearts. They felt that Yan Wushuang was about to be taken. However, just as the atmosphere between Yan Wushuang and Bai Zichen was harmonious, an untimely noisy voice suddenly sounded. Wow, long-legged girl, your legs are so long and so white. I can lick them for a year. Who is it? All the inner court disciples, including some elders, were stunned. Which blind guy dared to say such arrogant words and flirt with the goddess in the hearts of the inner court disciples? Bai Zichen's eyes suddenly darkened. Originally, the atmosphere between him and Yan Wushuang was quite good, but it was ruined by this sentence. Not far away, Yi Guqin, Mu Xingzu, and the divine eagle walked over. It is Yi Jianzong. Everyone looked over. Yan Wushuang's eyes turned and collided with Yi Guqin's eyes. Chapter 275. Their gazes met in the void. Although Yan Wushuang was a young girl, her eyes were sharp, like an unsheathed sword, with a sharpness that made it difficult for people to look at her directly. Yi Guqin's eyes were as calm as an ancient well. Facing Yan Wushuang's questioning and provocative gaze, Yi Guqin looked at her indifferently. Is she Yen Wushuang, the top student of the inner yard? Yi Guchen looked at Yen Wushuang. He had heard of Yen Wushuang's name before coming to the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest, but it was the first time he saw her after such a long time. Yen Wushuang could become one of the geniuses who left her name on the swordsmanship-seeking tablet, which meant that her talent in sword principle could not be underestimated. It had to be said that even with Yi Guchen's calm state of mind, when he saw Yen Wushuang for the first time, he had a trace of admiration in his heart. This young girl was indeed very attractive. Whether it was her cold temperament that did not match her delicate face or her pair of stunning slender legs, without exception, they made the man's heart itch. However, Yi Guchen was not that kind of person, so he just glanced at her indifferently and then looked away. Yi Guchen, please take care of your mount. Although Bai Zichen wanted to pull out the divine eagle's tendons and bones and roast it on the fire, he still looked calm on the surface. What? Boy, what did you say? Say it again? The divine eagle's feathers stood up, and its eyes were sharp. I said. Bai Zichen was about to speak when a kind disciple came forward and whispered in his ear. Bai Zichen's body trembled slightly, and he glanced at Wang Shaoan, who was not far away with a gloomy face. His indifferent expression was slightly stiff, but he did not say anything in the end. Obviously, the tragic things that the divine eagle had done to Wang Shaotian had spread throughout the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. Moreover, Yen Wushuang was here, so Bai Zichen did not want any accidents to happen. Yi Guchen of the Sword Sect, I've heard of your name for a long time. It's a pleasure to meet you today. I've also heard of all the miracles you've created in the Sword Sect Pagoda Forest. I have to say, it's surprising and admirable, but… Yen Wushuang's voice was indifferent, and she paused. Yi Guchen frowned slightly. He could sense a trace of doubt and hostility in Yen Wushuang's words. People have to face reality, don't they? Glory only belongs to the past. The current you, to be honest, is very weak. Yen Wushuang's appearance was exquisite and pleasing to the heart. However, the words that came out of her mouth were incomparably cold and somewhat ear-piercing. This Yi Guchen has never met you before, nor do we have any enmity between us. I wonder what the meaning of your words is? There was a trace of indifference on Yi Guchen's face. Others saw Yen Wushuang as a goddess and had a longing for her. However, Yi Guchen did not. Do you still not understand what I'm talking about? Or could it be that you think you're like Bai Zichen and possess the comprehension ability and strength to leave behind a sword mark on solitary sword cliff? Yen Wushuang's fine eyelashes raised as she spoke indifferently. Yi Guchen looked at Bai Zichen with a strange expression. Seeing this, the corners of Bai Zichen's mouth curled up into a faint smile, and his chest unconsciously straightened a little. What's going on? Yi Guchen was puzzled. Yi Guchen, are you still playing dumb? Could it be that you don't know that Bai Zichen left behind a sword mark on solitary sword cliff? Not far away, Gu Tuo seemed to have seized an opportunity to take revenge, and he sneered. He left a mark on solitary sword cliff? Yi Guchen's eyes revealed a trace of surprise, and he instantly understood. At the side, Mu Xingzu twisted her fingers and said timidly, Sorry, senior brother Yi. I should have told you this news earlier, but Xingzhu was afraid that senior brother Yi would mind this kind of thing, so I didn't say anything. I see. Yi Guchen wasn't stupid, and he instantly understood the cause and effect. This was merely a play of substituting one for another. He looked at Bai Zichen and said indifferently, Bai Zichen, are you sure it was you who left behind a sword mark on solitary sword cliff? Yi Guchen's gaze was extremely deep. Although Bai Zichen's expression remained calm, his heart was beating like a drum. Why does Yi Guchen look as if he has seen through it? Could it be that he was hiding in the dark and saw it? No, that's impossible. No one will believe him. Bai Zichen thought about many things in his heart. He didn't say yes or no, and only remained silent. And this silence, in the eyes of outsiders, made Bai Zichen even more mysterious and profound, as if he didn't care about Yi Guchen's doubts. Yi Guchen, can I interpret your words as jealousy? Teng Jingshan walked out and mocked. Yi Guchen, if you can't accept this reality, then I'm really disappointed. Yen Wushuang shook her head slightly. She originally thought that although Yi Guchen's true chi was crippled, he should be a straightforward person. But now, in her eyes, Yi Guchen had become a person who was jealous of Bai Zichen. Yi Guchen smiled and shook his head, but he didn't explain anything. Firstly, as a sword sect and sword demon, his pride made him disdain to explain anything. Secondly, with his true chi crippled cultivation, if he said that he was the one who left the sword scar, it would only lead to more ridicule and ridicule from outsiders. As for the pathos of heaven, if he wanted to display its true power, he could only wait until his chi si was unsealed and he broke through to the divine soul realm. Therefore, as long as Yi Guchen had a breakthrough in this trip to the Void Sword realm, all the truth would naturally be revealed. Seeing Yi Guchen shaking his head and smiling without saying anything, the disappointment in Yan Wushuang's eyes became even more obvious. In her opinion, this was tantamount to avoidance and speechlessness. Uncle Feng, is this the successor you have chosen? It's really despicable. Yan Wushuang sighed in her heart. She spoke again. Yi Guchen, I, Yan Wushuang, only have one thing to tell you. People should know their own limits. What do you mean? Yi Guchen put his hands behind his back and was incomparably calm. You should know what it means in your heart. If you don't have the ability, the top of the Forbidden City will undoubtedly disgrace Uncle Feng. Yan Wushuang's tone was cold. She turned around and strode away with her slender legs. Looking at Yan Wushuang's slender back, Yi Guchen couldn't help but feel amused and said, Yan Wushuang, then I'll also tell you that in the inner yard ranking battle a month later, I'll return what you said intact. Yi Guchen flicked his sleeves and his eyes were cold. I, Yan Wushuang, will wait. Yan Wushuang didn't look back and left directly. Many inner yard disciples were a little confused when they heard the conversation between the two. However, there were also some elders and disciples who knew the inside story. When they heard the words, top of the Forbidden City, their pupils suddenly shrank. They looked at Yi Guchen one by one, revealing a look of surprise and uncertainty. Could it be that the successor chosen by Master Feng is Elder Qing? He was surprised. After a brief interlude, some of the inner yard disciples who were going to participate in the Void Sword realm had also gathered. Under the lead of Elder Qing He and Elder Gu Tua, they all boarded the airship. The spiritual inscriptions on the surface of the airship bloomed with light. The entire airship floated in the air and flew into the distance. Yi Guchen stood on the deck of the airship with his hands behind his back and his eyes looking into the distance. He could feel that Ji Ling, Bai Zichen, Wang Xiaotian, Li Lingxiao, Ting Jingshan, Yuan Mie, and the others were all secretly looking at him. Most of them were playful, hostile, mocking, and indifferent. Many of the inner yard disciples were the same. It seems that I must make a breakthrough in this trip to the Void Sword realm. As long as I can make a breakthrough, any problem can be solved. Whether it's the bet with the first elder or the scar on the one-sword cliff, if I can recover my strength, Yi Guchen of the Sword Sect, fear nothing. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.